2019 Master Spring City Council work session. Roll call.
Councilor Smith?
Here.
Councilor Todd?
Excused.
Mayor Pro Tem Fortune?
Present.
Mayor Duray?
Present.
Councilor Elder?
Excused.
Councilor Wolbrook?
Here.
Councilor Rohr?
Here. And if someone just could note if Councilman Todd does show up, please just make a note that we can record that in the minutes. Just so that we can record that on the record. Thank you. All right, we don't have any presentations per se other than through our discussion items, so we'll call item D1, MAPS presentation. Before we start, I do want to ask council, that this item is for discussion item. It is not coming up for a vote. If it were coming up for a vote, I would recuse myself. I do have a property in that area, and so I want some direction from council. If you would prefer to have Mayor Pro Tem Fortune facilitate the conversation and you step aside, I'd be glad to do that. If you're okay with my facilitating the conversation, I'd be glad to do that as well. Your preference, this item will not be coming up, as I say, for a decision until after the first of the year. But I'm fine with it.
Fine every year, just discussion on fine.
And you have the same conversation about the RPP, and probably not participate in that conversation since it is coming up for a vote, but we'll discuss that. Okay, so Denise, Jared, if you're joining us up here, anybody else? That's good? Okay, welcome. And let's make sure those are on.
How's that?
You know, I've heard of making an entrance before, but that's quite the entrance. So,
Don't turn it down.
yeah, maybe turn it all the way down. I don't know.
I have no idea.
If it's not,
If Randy's
Okay.
not here.
That's good. Once we get settled. Okay. And you have a presentation for us? Is that ready for you to go? Turn the volume down on both. Sometimes it's a cell phone issue too. It's because it's in line with the speakers, so they're getting feedback. You're hired. That would be a mistake. That's not the volume's on the back. Try to put one between the two. Let's try that. Maybe move on. Okay, it's on. Let's try it. Okay. Maybe just make it a little higher. Okay, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Denise Ayton with Bohannon, Houston, and I'm the principal in charge on this project and a senior vice president with the company.
Jared Lee with Bohannon, Houston. I'm the project manager and project engineer for the manager on the project.
Great.
So we have a presentation this evening, I know you had taken a poll of how many people in the audience were there at the public meeting, but I'd like to, for everyone's sake, give a little bit of a project overview. The Manitou Avenue project goes from Park Avenue to Serpentine Drive. The primary scope of the project in the original scope that was defined in the funding application to CDOT included drainage improvements and pedestrian improvements. So the overall scope for the project was to incorporate pedestrian facilities, lighting, landscaping, and drainage improvements along the corridor. That's important to remember because the whole application and the whole approval from CDOT is based on that scope, that original scope of the project. So as we know, there are some challenges along this corridor. It is a right-of-way of approximately 70-80 feet wide. It's not entirely consistent. The roadway elements that we have been considering throughout design include 2 travel lanes, the center turn lane, parking, drainage infrastructure, bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, lighting opportunities, landscaping opportunities, and then the undergrounding of utilities along the corridor. So the question has been, how do we prioritize these roadway elements and how do we make them all fit within that corridor? project timeline, we started this project in February of 2019. We've been working on it. Thus, to date, we've had 4 public events and 3 steering committee meetings, and I'll go over those a little bit with you. I believe they put in a request, an application to extend the deadline for funding on this to get that extended. I don't know if that's been approved or not.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we have until May of 2020 to actually go out for bid for the construction of this project, and then the construction would occur in the fall of 2020. It's important, this timeline here is tied to that scope, and it is tied to the funding reimbursement for the city. Steering committee number 1, I'll just go through these briefly so that you can understand the input we've heard to date. Was in April of 2019, and we built the steering committee based on residents, business owners, bicycle group representatives, the Chamber of Commerce, and other corridor users. We've had a lot of participation from our steering committee. They've been very helpful. They weren't necessarily maybe very large, but they're very committed to the project, and they've been very helpful. And of course, the first thing they identified was the need for parking and the desire to have opportunity for bicyclists along the corridor. We had 2 public meetings in April as well. The first one was in the park. It was an outdoor event, so we not only had the people that live along the corridor, but we also had people that were just in the community walking around that evening, and gave a lot of feedback on the project that really would, identify priorities for mobility and access, the landscaping piece, obviously safety, more parking, and connectivity throughout the community. So then, the following week, we also participated in the Mobility Summit, which was put on by the team, the Kim Horn team, that was doing the Mobility Master Plan, the Transportation Mobility Master Plan for the city. So we participated in that event, and we had a booth there, and we worked with them on that. And so everybody that came to that event was over here in Memorial Hall to talk about the Mobility Summit, also about the Mobility Plan, also participated and gave input on this corridor project specifically. We went back to the steering committee in May and June. We added that actual 3rd steering committee event because it was really important to get input from them on these typical sections that we were looking at to figure out how do we fit all of those roadway elements in that tight corridor, and how do we balance the parking and the bicycles and all of the priorities that the community identified thus far. We had another public meeting in July, and this one was shared with the Becker's Bridge meeting. So again, we had a cross-section of the community because half of the hall was for Becker's Bridge and half of the hall was for the MAPS project. Again, reinforced the need for parking, the desire for landscaping along the corridor, and really made us look closely at those typical sections that we were building, and led us to the proposed layout, which we had presented at the meeting last week. So the elements proposed on the current layout are 2 travel lanes, maintaining the center turn lanes, parallel parking, the drainage infrastructure, underground of the utilities, bicycle facilities, which are considered both the sharrows within the corridor as well as the connection to the Creek Walk multi-use path along the east side, pedestrian facilities both within the sidewalk and the Creek Walk trail, as well as lighting and opportunities for landscaping. So we went back to the public last week and through the input we had received and a response to the layout so far, we identified the key areas of discussion were parking and talking about the driveways and the center turn lane opportunities for other diagonal parking or other things. The bicycle and pedestrian facilities with a focus on that Creek Walk connection, and then streetscaping, which was a discussion of landscaping and signage, and then most importantly, the lighting. We can talk about this a little, these key issues I'm gonna go through in detail, because I think these are the ones we're gonna need discussion on for the evening, but this sets the tone for that. And then the other thing I wanted to identify, we had almost 50 people at this event, and I created a little geocoded map for you so you could see that we did get people from across the entire community for that map there in the corner. That's where the meeting attendees came from. So it was a good representation of the community that came to that meeting that evening. So, and again, to reiterate, those are the 3 areas that we do want input from the City Council. It's important for us to understand what you want along this corridor. So I just thought I'd highlight those specifically. the areas that we are hoping to get some feedback and some input on as we go forward with the design. So parking, everyone's concerned about obviously the loss of parking. So we have identified that that there will be a loss of 5 existing parking spots on the west side, a gain of 6 parking spots on the west side in different locations, and the loss of 5 existing parking spots on the east side. This is based only on, this particular section there is based on the legal parking spots. So we did go back and take a look at, there are many spots along the corridor that aren't necessarily legal parking spots, but are used pretty regularly by residents and visitors along the corridor. And there are approximately 25 to 30 illegal spots that may be lost with this design, and 5 to 6 of those may still be permitted. We're still coordinating with that property owner to see if they do have a permit for those spots. But in order for us to do the design that is required under the CDOT requirements, that those illegal spots will be lost, and then that is the other status of the parking from a legal spot perspective.
Can you say what would cause something to be an illegal spot versus a legal spot?
So,
And
the,
with relation to this particular corridor.
yeah, and in particular, some of the spots we're talking about are on the far north end by the roundabout, which have actually already been blocked because those spots were actually occurring on private property outside of the city right away, and that property owner has since put up some boulders to prevent that. So those are already, have gone away. Other ones were, we had some documentation that looked like where people were encroaching into the yellow zones and, you know, parking beyond the legal limits. So when we say, based on legal counts, we might count 2 spots in a location where typically 3 people were squeezing in there, but they were really extending beyond those limits.
Or parking in front of garages that may not work.
Right.
So it's totally acceptable from a, you know.
Blocking access.
Right. Continuing with the parking issue, CDOT has made a statement that they will not allow diagonal parking, so we've been working under that decision. And under this current layout, parking is maximized. I mean, we have prioritized parking. With the exception of the locations that we have maintained for the utility locations. So other than that, we have definitely prioritized parking along the corridor. We're certainly open to considering compact size motorcycle spots, if that's a direction that you want to take. We're open to that. And again, some of those spots are maintained for utilities and amenity zones, and there may potentially be the opportunity to bring back 1 or 2 spots after those utilities are located, but that would be a decision we also would like input on, and do we prioritize those 1 or 2 spots over landscaping along the corridor, because that's where the landscaping would fit in.
Yeah, currently there's pretty minimal landscaping along the corridor, just in a couple of those locations, so that would be the trade-off.
Minimum new landscaping.
Correct.
You're not removing other than maybe 1 tree, 2 trees? Relocate. But other than that, not changing the landscape.
2 other areas that were discussed with relation to parking were the existing driveways. Like I said, there are some garages perhaps that don't function, or properties that have multiple locations. Changing access points was not part of the scope of this project. It would require additional studies under CDOT to actually have the opportunity to change the access and additional application process for that. So that would potentially be a time delay and jeopardize the funding of this project. So doesn't mean that couldn't happen later. You know, that's something that could be added later if somebody wanted to go through that process and vacate their driveway and work with CDOT on that. That could potentially happen after this project. And then the center lane, which was really connected with the opportunity, you would have to remove the center lane to get the diagonal parking, but the center lane itself does bring real value to the corridor from an operational perspective. It does tie into the turn lanes of the intersection, which are required by CDOT. It also allows for loading and unloading locations for the businesses and also the residents if they're moving in or moving out. And we heard from the steering committee and the public that that is a really important opportunity to keep the traffic flowing and being able to use that. And then I also was speaking to SP Plus the other day, and they really feel strongly about the center turn lane for emergency access opportunities. so that you don't necessarily get a roadway completely blocked, if you don't have that center turn lane there to get emergency vehicles through, and then snow storage, so. The other area of key issue is the bicycle and pedestrian access. Just to give an overview of the project from a big picture, the pedestrian facilities, we have designed ADA compliant crossings and curb ramps at all the intersections. Those bump outs at the intersections do improve pedestrian visibility and ADA access. They do take up more space. That is where most of those 5 to 6 spots were lost, was actually at the intersections where we had to put the roll outs in for the ADA grade as well as the visibility. We do have the 5-foot sidewalk on the west side right now currently, and the 10-foot multi-use path on the east side for pedestrian access. And then in addition to that, we have the bicycle facilities. We have the sharrows along the corridor. The concept of bike lanes was brought up at the beginning, but we didn't get a lot of support from that because it would be a real compromise with the parking. So we went with the sharrows instead, and based on the speed along that corridor, it's a totally acceptable use of that bicycle facility technique. And then again, the bicycles could use the multi-use path for sort of maybe the less experienced bicyclists. Probably the more experienced bicyclists will be traveling along the sharrows within the roadway. And then I do know there was a lot of concern at the meeting last week about how do we connect with the Creek Walk Master Plan and what does that look like. So I put a few extra slides in here to make sure that we're looking at that closely. Within the Creek Walk Master Plan, they do refer to this project. They defer to this project actually to do the more detailed design along there. And it highly identifies the need for pedestrian and bicycle facilities within this corridor. We did throw a couple of options up here that came out of the meeting. One was to keep the 10-foot shared use path, which what we have, but then also the idea of a 5-foot sidewalk with a 5-foot landscaping buffer that could include trees. You do need the 5 feet to put in trees, so it would have to be 5 and 5. And then the other option would be maybe a 5 to 6 foot sidewalk with a 4 to 5 foot low growth vegetation that maybe later, if you wanted to take out and expand into a trail, could be another opportunity. It's much easier to remove low growth vegetation and turn that into a trail. You certainly wouldn't want to plant trees and then take those out. So those are just some ideas to sort of continue the conversation on what do we do with that connection. But I also wanted to just show what the Creek Walk Master Plan does indicate within that corridor. Like I said, it does have bicycle facilities, specifically bicycle lanes in a very general mode. But as I said, those were not very popular. They did not get much support with the Public Order Steering Committee, giving the compromise that would have to be made. But what I did want to show is on each end, if you look here on the north end, and the maps on the left are straight out of the Creek Walk Plan, the solid red line just north of the project does represent a multi-use trail. So that is why we decided within the corridor we would propose a multi-use trail, because both on the north and the south end, the Creek Walk Plan does have that specific type of facility. So we felt like it would be a good connection for the community. And again, we got a tremendous amount of support at the first meeting. We actually put up some options at the very first public meeting. We had a lot of support for the actual multi-use trail, for over the bike lanes, over the sidewalk. So we went with that at that time. I know that there was also some questions last week on how would we actually make that connection from the multi-use trail. How would it transition out of the corridor? You can see here we put just a little yellow dot so that you can see in the future. If that trail comes in on the right-hand side, that's our rendering of the proposed layout. If and when that trail is added, you could just connect that right up in that location. And then here is what's happening on the south end. Again, the Creek Walk Master Plan does have that solid red line, the multi-use trail recommendation. And on the south end, again, where those yellow dots are, currently that would be a sidewalk. The existing sidewalk connection in this plan, but we could stripe it, do some pavement or something like that to get that Creek Walk trail connected from the multi-use trail in our plan to a future trail on the south. And then finally, the last area of discussion is streetscapes, which includes lighting, signage, and landscaping. Lighting is the strongest area we've gotten a lot of input on. Probably the most consensus of any of the issues we'd like input from the city council on to have minimal lighting along the corridor with a, priority for conflict zones, which would be like intersections and crosswalks. I would say that the majority of the input we've gotten throughout the whole project was supporting that, so I feel like there was some real consensus around that. But that may be, not necessarily directly aligned with what CSU will design for that portion of the corridor. They do the design and the lighting, and they may have their full-scale lighting, recommendation, we don't know, we haven't seen their design yet. But it would be helpful to understand that not only the community would support a minimal lighting pattern over there, but the position of the city council would be helpful for us as well when we're coordinating with CSU to maybe override their design for that part of the corridor. And that is a process that does happen, it is acceptable, so.
Denise, is it possible, Herman, that you would go to CSU with, here's what we'd like to suggest. We know you guys are gonna make the final decision, maybe up, maybe no, but here's our preference. And go to them with something, here's what they laid out, and have them stamp it or comment on it, whatever it is.
So we've already started that conversation with them. When we meet with them at the progress meetings, monthly, and we've had the design review meetings, and we've already been very clear that that's what we've heard, so we're already pushing that.
But can you actually go to them with a map and say, here's their laid out, you know, you guys are gonna weigh in and make a final decision on it, but here's here's how we've laid it out on our plan.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly what we're talking about,
Okay.
is that we would lay something out that we think works for the city, and propose that to them, and hopefully get their buy-in or come to some sort of compromise.
I mean, they'll still integrate it into.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but at least it
But-
gives them something to start with.
Right.
Perfect.
And if, you know, this forum supports that and the public forum supports that, we really think it's not gonna be a problem, you know. Signage, we haven't got a lot of input on signage, other than a request for adequate signage to be clear where the bikes and peds should go through that corridor. And then landscaping, as we said, the current plan does require the relocation of 2 trees, but they're small enough that we do think that they could be relocated. And then the challenge is, again, the choice between landscaping and parking, and understanding sort of the position of the council on that would be very helpful for us. And then just to reiterate that there's a lot goes into that landscape plan. We wouldn't do that landscape plan until the 60 to 90% design, but certainly there's a lot that goes into that. You know, low maintenance and snow storage issues and things like that.
Water quality.
Water quality. So. And then I'll just bring back to this slide, we can end here, just sort of reiterating the input that would help us go forward with the design. Thank you.
Okay, so, you wanna start with parking? So the direction that we're being asked to consider, and by the way, we're hoping, we're not gonna repeat what happened last week in terms of public comments, because we got that, not what happened. The same process, people had a chance to read, but I did ask that some pads be made available, if people have questions or comments on this and you'd like to write those down and give them to us, we'd be delighted, so, I'm gonna leave those with somebody, and whoever might want a pad or something, we have pens if you're missing those too. But that would probably be the most efficient way for us to get your input, is to write down your questions. If you have a question you'd like to have answered tonight, write it down and pass it up to Michelle or whoever's sitting up here will be good, and we'll see if we can address it. Okay, so how would you like to proceed in terms of, the concept seems to be parking? Is there anything in particular that we're supposed to do, or you'd like some feedback on in terms of those 3 items?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Striking and parking, what's your specific question?
So that came up, a recommendation to either do like a parking lane that doesn't specifically delineate the parking spots. So the option of either having the very delineated parking spots or a free flow parking lane. Again, communication with SB Plus has indicated that they, and I would need them to speak for themselves, but during our conversation, they actually preferred the delineated spots, because you end up with more parking, really, because you have more control of where people are parking, so, and we feel that way as well, but that was reinforced by a conversation with them, but.
And are you looking for guidance tonight on that issue, or is that a future issue?
We're proposing striping of the parking. If there's a reason that you disagree with that, we would love to hear that.
Alright. Council?
I will say that anecdotally, since I was parked across from the Mac, which used to be just a parking lane, and then they put the little T's in, since the little T's have been there, it seems like parking is much more efficiently used than it used to be. So, that's just my experience.
I concur.
I concur, I mean, making it identified, cause we did that right after they did the downtown, let it free flow. And it was, you get one block and might have 3 cars in it, so.
I've got different experience in my neighborhood, which just went from a block to a T, and the Ts are pretty small. Maybe it's just the mix of cars we have, but I think that really is part of it. So if I want reasonable length between, I don't park in the T because so I don't pay attention to the T's anyway. And that's gonna happen because they're not gonna be big enough for all the trucks from Texas and even my truck from Colorado. It's just gonna happen. People are gonna want the space they're gonna want no matter what is there. So you can have them or not have them. I just don't think they're gonna be overly adhered to. But I don't care about it.
Sounds like the majority is fine with some sort of striping. Okay.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, as well as I know the management of the parking spaces is also something that you guys are gonna talk about in length, but I think that's something beyond our scope. We're just gonna allocate space for parking and how it's striped, which could easily be corrected in the future, and how it's managed is something that again would happen beyond our scope of work. So I think just the direction we were looking for tonight is again whether we should be prioritizing the parking over those other components, landscaping and things. Like I said, we have a pretty minimal amount of landscaping right now, and we are reserving some of that space for large utility vaults. We know we're gonna have a couple of those, so we reserve some space for that. But if there are some opportunities when that design is done and we have an open space, should we be bringing back a parking space, or should we leave it for opportunity for some additional landscaping, some public art, things like that?
That was a question?
That is
I
the
think so.
question that
Okay.
we're hoping to get some direction
And
on.
we're talking about 1 to 2 spots maximum.
1 to 2 spots maximum.
Well, that's our thought,
Right.
but the question is, again, if there are those opportunities, again, should we bring that back? Or when you look at the layout that we have tonight, that we've done so far, like I said, there's kind of a small stretch that has some landscaping in it. You know, is that what you're looking for, or would you rather have us replace those with parking spaces?
Can I ask a question? What was your public consensus on this topic? Would you say none?
But
Okay.
but not to dismiss the people who
Right.
did want
Right.
landscaping as well, but I would say the majority was parking.
So I think it's great that you're asking, even though it's 1 or 2 spaces, because that feels right to ask. I mean, I would say if the public consensus leaned in the direction of parking, we should go that way. I think it's also a little bit less long-term maintenance for perhaps health works, to keep, and then, unfortunately, sometimes those become the dog area or things like that. And so sometimes they can have problems too, even though intentions are good. So I would say parking.
I like the plan you presented already, and want to squeeze out the landscaping and kind of softens the built environment. I think there are other possibilities we could do. Nobody's talked about trying to buy shaded out as neighborhood parking or otherwise. We have a parking deficit in town that will be discussed here in an hour, and 1 or 2 isn't gonna make a hoot of difference in the grand scheme of things. But buying what the shaded L was would be much more impactful. Might help Creek Walk Trail, might not. I'd hate to just get wrapped up over one or two spaces and giving the landscaping a short shift, I think.
I would have to, agree with Jay. My sense is that you have done a good job of objectively incorporating the desires of the stakeholders to include lots of users. And if it's only one or two spots, it's hard to say do away with the, or do away with the landscaping for one or two spots. Having great sympathy, empathy, whatever, for folks who really, need and like parking. But I, can say this now or later, but I think we really need to, it's very difficult to assess, or it's also easy to get wrapped around the axle about something when we need to be, designing not only for today, but for the future. And, as well as in the context of all the other things, i.e. the parking that we're gonna be discussing in a little while. So it seems like maybe 1 to 2, maybe getting wrapped around the axle.
I would have to agree with that. I think that we put a lot of work and a lot of effort into this, and if it comes down to 1 or 2, I don't think that's enough for the challenge to take that away.
Okay. All right, we have a number of questions here. Mr. Parkinson, is it possible for you to write down your questions and requests? The difficulty is that others have done that, and we're going to read the questions in a moment. And so if we open it up to the public to have a general conversation, then it's not fair to have you have a general conversation and others not. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to get your information forward without 25 people trying to participate in this conversation.
Yeah, it's just a different conversation than the community meeting. In other words, this is an opportunity, you guys are the ones that can request DHI to make changes to the design. I've already heard things that were not part of the community conversation, so.
Do you have specifics? It'd be helpful if you could write those and we'll bring those
Do you wanna
up.
read this then? I guess you could read this.
Sure.
That was not my intent, but anyway, you could read all that, that would help.
Okay.
You can go through them as you hit those various things. It's parking and then it's.
Okay, so let me address the first one here. I don't know if they're in particular order. I'm going to try to address the easy one. Is the parking in this area for residents only or for non-residents? And whoever asked that question, we are going to be discussing the residential parking permit program later on in the agenda. And the proposal is to expand the residential parking to have more residential parking in that area. So if you can hang out to the later in the agenda, you'll get a little more detail about that. But the residential parking that's being planned in that area is for residents only, with the exception of some 2-hour commercial spots, which can be used by residents and non-residents. And we'll have more detail on that.
I don't think that's true. It's a very narrow scope what we're going to be discussing for the RPP coming forward. It doesn't include most of maps. It includes a very tiny section that's not even in maps.
Good point. So the current layout is a residential park, most of it is a residential parking area. And so you need a permit to park in there with the exception of some spaces as I just described. There's 2 spaces in front of 1141, I believe, and some spaces in front of 1107.
The whole east side.
Whole east side is
public
open.
parking.
Is open, right, this is on the west side, excuse me, on the, what I would call it to be the south side.
Right, you have to say how it's north-south.
Right, right, so that is true, the south side is residential parking, the north side is open to anybody. I think that answers that question, and there'll be, I think, Jay's right, the RPP extension will deal with primarily the area to the east of the existing RPP, but we'll get into that in a minute. So hopefully that addressed that question, we'll have more to come. Here's a question about the speed limit. The comment is the speed limit up until a certain point is 30. The question is whether the speed limit can be reduced to 20 miles per hour.
And I think that So I guess the first thing is we're doing some things hopefully that will calm traffic through there just overall, but I think the other intent there is to look at a speed reduction and making it consistent throughout that corridor.
Okay. This question refers to the Disability Act, and it indicates that Colorado Springs was told they had to fix a variety of sidewalks and so forth. Question is, what does Manitou Springs doing to comply? And let's limit that question to this particular area, since that's the area we're talking about. Do you wanna talk about the ADA compliance in this area?
Yeah, and I think what they're talking about is anytime you do a road reconstruction project, you're required to make ADA improvements. The overall scope of this project actually was pedestrian and drainage improvements, so that was the goal, but we will be designing and meeting ADA guidelines, and that's where we talked about some of the additional improvements with the bulb outs at the intersections and things to make accommodations for ADA ramps and crosswalks and other items.
Okay, hopefully that addressed that question. Here's a couple different questions. How many spots are available to local residents in the Schmishny parking lot? There are a number of permits that are sold. They're not reserved permits. If you buy a permit, you're not guaranteed a spot. And last I checked, there were, do you know how many permits were sold in that lot?
I didn't.
I believe it's 48.
How much?
48.
No, how many were permits for that lot?
I believe it's 48 and there's 44 spots in there. Kevin can probably answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
We sell up to 45,
Uh.
24/7, 365 permits, and we have 25 PM only permits.
Okay. Could there be more available for those living, it says more available free spots for those living on the avenue. Obviously, that's the nature of this conversation, is to try to get as much parking in that avenue as we can, balancing those other needs. So hopefully that answers this question. Why prioritize parking? This is a statement. Why prioritize parking over things that could make our community unique, i.e. Creek Walk Trail and beautify and landscape downtown? I think we just had a brief conversation about that. Can we wait for a decision at least until we get the results of the transportation and mobility study? And probably the answer to that question is yes and no, depending on funding. So this is in part being driven by some funding decisions. The mobility study project will be made available to council in January, so there will be some time, I think, to do some tweaks about that. That's my understanding of the timing, January, February, depending on where you are in the design. So it's gonna be close as to whether there'll be any. But you all have been in touch with Kenny Horn, I believe, and so they've been trying to coordinate their efforts with Kenny Horn and hopefully be consistent.
But when was the last time you were coordinated with Kim Horn?
So I spoke to them yesterday, and we're gonna have another call tomorrow, but I've been tracking them since the mobility summit, the summaries and results they've been putting on the website to make sure that we're aligned with the priorities for the pedestrian and the bicycle facilities, and everything that they have on their summaries align with the priorities that we have.
Okay, is there any opportunity for them to comment on your design? In other words, give feedback back to you?
Of course, yeah. And I believe they're on our mailing list, I'd have to check that, but I know that as part of the mobility summit, we captured their emails as well, so they should have had access to the online mapping as well, but I'll make sure that they do and they can give input on there.
Okay, so here's one general question. Marked or unmarked parallel spaces, I think we talked a little bit about that in terms of, the question is referring to the standard. Can you have 18-foot compact at either end of the section to allow another space?
Yeah, and that's what we talked about, that right now we laid out everything out for a standard length for parallel parking, but there are, and then when we didn't have enough room for that, as well as room to pull in and pull out, that's where we put the landscape spots. But so we can look at if some of those might have accommodated either, again, a compact space or motorcycle parking or something else that was brought up that try and accommodate some of those smaller spaces. But again, it would come out of, and that's what we're talking about. Should we prioritize that over landscaping kind of buffer space?
Okay. Thank you. There's some additional comments, and the comment is that this person heard that at the 11-4 meeting everyone's in favor of getting as many parking spaces on both sides of the street as possible. And the question, I think, just the question is, can CSU, let's see. Is there some opportunity to find a place for utility votes that don't impact parking spaces?
It's difficult, obviously they need to be accessible, so that means they don't want them under parking spaces, they don't want them in the roadway. They really need to be spaces that are allocated for them to be able to get in and access them.
And why, if they're in the sidewalk, do they actually impact parking at all?
They are not in the sidewalk.
They're not, they're just in the bump outs, so to speak?
Right.
Is it possible to put them in the sidewalk?
Not in the sidewalk, they're fairly large, so meaning they would exceed the sidewalk width, some of them. Some of them are like 6 and 7 feet, in dimension, as well as the space that would be required to install them. So we'd really be pushing tight to make that work. Possibly within the trail, but then they have to make sure that they're also ADA accessible, so they have to be flush.
So I guess the question is for the council, is there some opportunity for council to weigh in and say, we'd like these votes to be here, or there, to not impact parking? Is that something that we can ask you to look at?
CSU is gonna do that design, and we've asked them for some guidance as far as we're trying to get some as far as, spacing and how often we need to allocate space, but they really were pushing us to give them a design, and then they would lay it out and put them where they needed them based on, their utility design and loads and services and different things. So we're really waiting for direction from them on that.
And we did try to put them in places where they wouldn't go in and take a full new parking spot.
Right.
So that's why they're connected pretty tightly to the rollouts and other areas where it would just be a little bit of an extension of a place that was already utilizing a parking spot for the ADA compliance piece, as opposed to picking locations that were like, let's just put them here and take a whole new spot. So we have provided that to CSU, sort of like you said, telling them, these are our preference locations, please try to put them in these locations to minimize the impact of parking.
Council, any other questions? We're gonna move on to bicycle, pedestrian, and streetscape. Any other questions on parking? Did I answer everybody's parking question? There's several lighting and design with the sidewalk question, which we'll get to when we get to that topic. Okay. Wait, hold on. Sorry.
Go put that one and then I'll follow.
Go ahead while I'm reading that. Go ahead.
I would just say a couple of things that occur to me. One is, I hear you when you say 1 or 2 spaces, but if you live in that neighborhood, 1 or 2 spaces means a lot. And as somebody who lives downtown, I know what it's like to live downtown. And 1 or 2 spaces, it's a big deal. I know it sounds crazy, but I've lived here for almost 18 years, and I think I see nodding heads. So I think that's perspective. Maybe the future has no cars. I don't see that yet. But I mean, maybe 10, 20 years from now, but the future that's today, gosh, 1 or 2 spaces, I'm trying to really get behind what the majority of council has said here tonight and just go, let it go. It's just 1 or 2 spaces, and I'm really struggling with that. I may get there. I'm not there tonight.
And I wanna make it really clear, I do not, want to diminish the importance of 1 or 2 spaces at all. I'm just looking at, I'm trying to look at a larger balance, that's all, so
And I do appreciate that too.
The idea of purchasing some property that hadn't really come up in our conversation, I think that's a great idea. For any number of reasons, and could provide much more than 1 to 2 spaces. In the long term, that's probably would be a really good strategy. I'm just gonna cover this, it's a little bit different. The question is concerning the median design. And the question is, can the median be designed or reconstructed such that it could incorporate trolley tracks if this becomes desirable in the future?
You want us to address that?
Sure.
We had not considered that, and the intent is to try and kind of mimic what currently exists through the other portions of MAC two, but I think again, that's a bigger plan, and it would have to be something that's looked at, you know, beyond just this section, but anything's possible.
With enough money, you could redesign it any way you like. That's the strange thing.
There's probably no solid hard infrastructure we're putting in that would prevent it
Yeah.
from
Okay,
happening.
I think that's really the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the design or construction that would prevent that from happening? Now, if you put a utility vault in there, maybe so. Okay, we'll get to this question in terms of the sidewalk in a moment. Okay.
So yes, actually, the decision about the creek walk trail, the multi-use path versus the sidewalk is probably, the most critical, question for us this evening. So, from a design perspective,
Progress.
and to be able to keep the schedule.
Okay. So, council?
Obviously, I'm a huge supporter of the multi-use 10-foot pathway. I mean, I think it's, in a much larger plan for the entire creek walk. If we, I mean, I saw your one option, to try to, you know, do a hybrid. I just think that we're not taking advantage of something that's been in the plan, that would have minimal impact, since you can't fit, even if you reduce it to 5 feet, you can't fit one person as a result anyway. I'm struggling with the landscaping issue, because I think that is also very important, but I would think that, we could go out and look at private owners along the way to look at landscape options in that regard as well. So for me, this is really important to me.
Okay.
As I said at the meeting, I think that having the multi-use trail is important for the neighborhood. It gives easy access to Center Springs Park for anybody who wants to walk or ride a bike, who's not comfortable walking or riding on the street.
I think that if we have the entire downtown area with that type of sidewalk and that availability, I think it'd be a great idea. But I think you're gonna confuse a lot of people where they're gonna be using this sidewalk up here, we can do this, but then they're gonna try to do it in a narrower area sidewalk, which is gonna impact pedestrian traffic, so. I mean, if we had done it from day one, then I would could support it, but I don't think it would, I think you're gonna get more confusion out of it than working the way you want it to.
Okay. Let me add a couple other thoughts here from the people in the audience. Trying to find a word to refer to. Okay. The comment is that there was considerable but not complete consensus on the 5-foot sidewalk only, with as many tree planting areas as possible, not the 10-foot multi-use path. Sharers on roadways or bicycles. And the comments is there a connection to the creek walk to the east? And I think you've addressed that. The comment being it's mostly residential. Bicyclists felt that they mostly would stay in the roadway, not multi-use. I think we've talked a little bit about that. And only a short section at the north end is next to the creek walk. So I think there was some conversation about where that was as well. And then this question is experience with shared bike pedestrian sidewalk, the 10-foot proposal. Are there user conflicts or more accidents?
It's pretty common, it's the recommended width for shared use between bicycles and pedestrians, I mean, around the, and around the state, there's plenty of opportunities where that works really well. So, again, it's not gonna be used comfortably by a commuter bicyclist. It's more for families, it's more for children, it's more for that type of activity, along that corridor.
Okay. Okay, I think you've heard a majority of council express an opinion to maintain the 10-foot width. The next issue is the streetscape lighting, more or less. Coordination with CSU, I'll just lead off with the comments here. The comment was that at the 11-4 meeting, everyone was in favor of minimal lighting. Lighting is directed towards the roadway and sidewalk. My understanding is that's the intention. And I think we've addressed the issue of can the city and DHI determine the process for Manitou to be able to request from CSU the lighting that we want, and I think we've addressed that.
We're on it.
We will go forward with that request to CSU. So I think that addresses that. Is there anything in particular the council wants to lay in on lighting, in terms of anything else, other issues on lighting? And Michelle, you have a comment?
I was just gonna make a suggestion, because it's one thing I think got discussed in the WAP area, but if you notice, the light poles in that corridor are a lot taller than the ones we use downtown. And though that height was what CSU generally automatically proposes, and we pushed for a lower height through the downtown, and I think you can see the difference, the scale of the lights is a lot different. And I would definitely, because of the large residential component in this area, I would definitely get them to do a shorter light, insist on it.
The rest of it, and CSU is comfortable with that, we understand that. So, thank you, Debbie, for
So,
I have a question.
yeah.
When you did the public meetings, did the business community along this area and the residential community have similar agreements on lighting? Because they're kind of two different needs. I mean, in our area of downtown, we actually liked the dark sky sort of thing, but we had a new shop move in, and he wondered why we hadn't asked to have those bulbs replaced. And so there's sometimes different needs, because businesses prefer more well lit at night, and residences sometimes tend to be more in the dark sky camp. And I'm just wondering how that panned out in your groups.
So we had a more vocal representation from the residents along the corridor for, the dark sky, less lighting, conflict zone only lighting. We didn't have a very loud expression from the businesses on more lighting. So they may feel that way, but they weren't as vocal
I
about
think
it.
they would have spoken if they had strong feelings about it.
All right, any other questions about streetscape lighting, coordination with CSU, preserving room for trees? Mr. Kerner, I'm gonna, if you have a real quick question, we're trying to limit the back and forth. We've asked people to write down their questions. Since you came in late, you didn't have that opportunity. But a quick question.
The color of the lighting, is it gonna match the downtown?
Good question.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was carefully chosen, so you don't want to go, it's a good question, sounds like yes. Okay, all right. Everybody get their questions answered?
I have one more in writing here.
Go ahead. Everybody else get their questions answered? Okay, thank you. We have one more quick question, real quick. Courtney, go ahead,
I can say it?
very quickly.
Too special.
Well,
Too
actually,
late.
the majority of people at the 11-4 meeting, wanted more trees in that section, and so on the east side, I think the majority, not everybody, the 11-4 said more trees, which would indicate then the 5 foot for the trees and 5 foot for the sidewalk, but that was, I just wanna say that was the majority, at least as I understand it, Denise, of people who are voting for more trees. And they could be done on the east side, not necessarily the west, north and south, Manitou Avenue, east side. So 5 foot for trees on the east side, not a 10-foot multi, 5 foot for trees, 5 foot sidewalk.
Right, and I think council has weighed in that they would prefer to have the 10-foot sidewalk.
I don't know they knew that was the community consensus at that meeting where there were 50 representatives of the community there. And I'm just letting you know that's what I heard.
Can you document that consensus?
Yeah,
As
that
well.
one, I was there, I didn't pick that up as a consensus.
Okay, let's just make the statement that there were people who wanted a 5-foot sidewalk for sure. There were people who wanted more trees. I weighed in on that. I think that's been brought up here tonight. I think that information has been forthcoming and clear. And I think council's had that in order to be able to make an informed decision. Is there anything that, you were at the meeting, was there anything that needs to be brought forward? And thank you for bringing that forward. I think we tried to capture.
No, I think what you just said is a reality.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I apologize for not writing this as a question, I couldn't think of how to pose it as a question. The only thing I'm gonna make this very quick. I would appreciate the council would consider is that if you are gonna have a multi-use sidewalk, walkway, creek walk, whatever you wanna call it, the width of it will make a huge difference on its safety, especially if you're talking about,
I understand, I think the council has decided to move forward with a 10-foot sidewalk.
okay.
And unless you're commenting, I think you were getting to that
Yeah,
point.
that's what I was heading.
That's what I thought. And the council has given some direction to maintain it.
Thanks.
All right, anything else on this topic? You've got the direction you need,
Thank you so much.
and, we'll move forward. Great. All right, the next is the parking management assessment. Dennis, I think you're gonna join us for that, and you all are welcome to stay or leave. We have a lot of other parking issues, the whole night basically will be parking. So those interested in parking, hang out. Dennis, come on up. Anybody else joining you? Ken? Michelle? Dane? Casey?
How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good.
Put as many as you can, or put some more chairs. Dennis, you're running that, and we need to get your presentation.
It's right here, parking, there you go. Go all the way to the bottom. And presentation right there. All the way down to presentation. There you
The
go.
mouse is very sensitive. Yeah, you have to click the bottom one. Now you got
Oh,
three
it's
holes.
down at the bottom.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
Bottom.
No.
Keep going.
Down.
There you go. This is gonna be, whole group's gonna help you with this one. How's that?
I can drive if you want.
Is there a way just to go from slide to slide and just scroll down?
Is it a PDF?
No, it's a PDF.
I can, if you want, just tell me when to change it, I'll change it, if you want. You can talk, if you don't take that too.
John, wanna introduce yourself? I think everybody knows everybody, but go ahead.
Kevin Stevenson, Facility Manager, SP Plus Parking.
I'm Dennis Burns, Project Manager for the Parking Assessment from Kenny Horn.
Casey Robinson, SP Plus.
Okay, Dane, you're in the back, you're gonna know Dane.
Also with SP Plus.
Just tell me.
Anybody else come in that's part of this presentation?
The slides. You get the whole slide at once. There. A little bit more. Okay. You just did the introduction, so next slide, please. So I just want to cover really briefly the process that we went through for this small project. Phase one was really kind of a current program assessment and a review of the SP Plus contract. Basically, what have you been doing for the last 5 years? So since you implemented Paved Parking in 2013. Phase two was limited community outreach. We had several meetings with the community and council and others. Phase three was kind of what are the key issues that we're seeing after evaluating the program. And then phase four was basically the recommendations. So we're just gonna kind of walk through this. Okay, next slide. So current program assessment and identifying program strengths and weaknesses was really, we moved that to the appendix, trying to keep the report smaller. So that specific assessment is in appendix 31. If you just read the report and didn't look at all of the, I apologize for the 1,000 pages of appendices, but literally over 1,000 pages. But the actual current program assessment is in Appendix 31. We conducted limited community outreach. We got input from council and city staff and downtown businesses, parking and transportation boards, including the Metro District Board and the current parking management firm, SB Plus, and that was contained in Chapter 4 of the report. Chapter 5 of the report was essentially the key issues identification. We're going to go through those in particular here in a few minutes. And then we developed kind of a prioritized list of what we think your action items should be going forward. And Chapter 6 was really develop a forward-looking comprehensive parking management approach, develop a list of action items, and then provide tools to support staff and advance the program going forward. That was all in Chapter 6. So that's just kind of an overview of the report, and I think the next slide basically just shows the table of contents. So it just kind of follows what I just said. So that's basically what the report is. Some of the key issues, I think this is going to be some important discussion here. One of the things that we identified for a program of this size, basically about 1,300 spaces, it's kind of fragmented and disconnected in terms of program organization and leadership. You've got a lot of groups managing pieces of this, not one group managing it all as one system. So I think that's, and there's more detail on this in the report, obviously, but the idea of trying to create a more consolidated and cohesive group that manages parking as a set of assets for the city collectively and comprehensively, we think is very important. When we do this kind of work around the country, this is a really common issue with municipalities in particular. A lot of times these parking programs evolved over time. Initially, we decided that we had some on-street spaces to deal with. Who handles the street? Public Works does that. Well, we push that there. Now we have to enforce something. We'll get police involved in that. But we've got the financial dimension of this. Now we're bringing in some money. Now let's get finance to deal with that. And they may all be doing very fine jobs managing their pieces, but they're managing pieces and not the system as a whole. So I think that you're missing opportunities for synergy and opportunities for just better operations and better management more comprehensively. Defining the future parking and mobility program management structure. This was really the heart of what we were asked to focus on. So you started up a paid parking program in 2013. You've implemented that. It's actually worked pretty well. I'm actually impressed with the job that you've done, and I think SB Plus has done a good job for you over the years. But the real question was, going forward, should we shift to more of a self-operation? Should we manage this with internal city resources? Should we hire a parking manager, basically, and manage that ourselves and hire our own staff? Or should we continue with the outsourced management model? And I think that's still a valid option for you. There's also a potential for a hybrid approach, which would be hire a city parking manager, but continue to have a parking management firm do the day-to-day stuff. So you're not building up a big bureaucracy of parking people in a small community like this. And I think there's some real benefit to that. And in the report, it kind of lays out the pros and cons of those options for you. We also found that there was kind of a lack of a set of guiding principles. And a lot of the programs we work around the country, they've really defined a set of, this is what we want our parking program to function, how we want it to function, and how we want it to support everything else we're trying to do as a city. So aligning the parking program, which is really just a support system to better support the larger strategic community goals, is really something that we would like to see. And having a set of defined guiding principles, and we provide you with a set of what we think those might be in the report. We also found a lack of coordination and communication between the boards, between the Parking and Transportation Board and the Metro Board. What information gets to council or doesn't get to council seemed to be hit or miss. It didn't seem like it was very consistent the way that you were getting the information that you needed on an ongoing basis, or that this group was getting information maybe from SB Plus and recommendations, but that never made it all the way up to council or stuff like that. It's just examples of kind of, again, going back to if the organization was more comprehensive and consolidated into one organization. And that doesn't mean that the parties that are involved can't still be involved. if we created something like a parking commission and members of the Metro Board were part of that commission, but it was only one commission and everybody's at the same table, something like that might be a benefit to the community going forward. We also thought that there were some unclear data metrics, that, you're not measuring everything, and you're not really getting good data. We saw some supply demand analysis that was done on a lot of the surface parking lots, but none of that involved really an assessment of how well utilized the on-street parking was, for example. There's a specific recommendation for a new system that's out there, that I would have killed for this system, went back 30 years ago when I was managing parking. But these are for about $8,000 a lot. You could get ongoing real-time count information that is pushed out to a sign that tells you how many spaces are available, and pushed out to an app, and pushed out to a website, so that people wanted to look and see where parking was available, they could find that. I think that's a very affordable option for you, and something that we're highly recommending that you move forward with. Again, part of this would help with the incomplete data that you've got right now. You're making decisions on really just partial data, and we think you'd be better off if you had better data to work from in making management decisions. An example of that would be, right now we have a certain number of spaces in all of the lots that are assigned as permit spaces. Well, during the peak summer season, things were really, really tight. We saw data that suggested you were about 83% utilized. When we were here on one of our trips, we basically thought you were almost 100% utilized. We wanted to stop and shop. We looked at every lot except for the Hiawatha lot and every on-street space, couldn't find anything. We ended up just going to the airport and leaving. With the College Railroad coming back, I think we really have to do something to get a better handle on having more parking, or we're gonna have more trouble. But the point I was gonna make about the data was, if we really need that for visitor parking during the peak season, maybe we shouldn't have permit parkers assigned in those lots. If we really need that space that badly for visitors to bring in, and to have those spaces turned over multiple times a day is better than having one person parking in that space all day, so you're getting better use of your resources.
And those permanent spaces are also on a first come, first served basis.
Yes.
Okay. But they can stay there, as can anybody, presumably.
Right. But if really what you need is more visitor spaces in the short term, maybe we could find a space for the longer term parkers somewhere else. It's a small piece, but it's just an example. If you had better data, you'd know exactly what you have and what the best use of that would be. It's still a question though that those permanent spaces, they're serving a purpose. But maybe during the peak summer season, we could do something a little different with those spaces. And then reassess and update the residential parking permit program. You're gonna be talking about that more this evening as well. But there are a lot of changes in the way residential permit programs are handled around the country, and we've provided Michelle some of that information to review currently. So these are just some of the key issues that we identified. So I think we're gonna move into some recommendations here. So given where we are, the SP Plus contract was extended through December. It's almost December now. It probably would make sense to extend the SP Plus contract for an additional 6 months or a year to give council and staff time to assess these recommendations and others as we gather more information, perhaps get more stuff. One of the things that we noticed in going through our review was that since the contract changes were made in July of 2019, the financial reporting and compensation seemed much better than they were before. And in doing the analysis, it was kind of confusing what was what, and tracking the expenses and everything. But where you are now, I think we should see that current contract extended. That's the way you've currently got it set up. The profitability of SP Plus is in line with all the industry standards. I think we're in good shape there. But it was confusing before, but I think you're in a better shape now. So continue what you've got with the July amendments, I think is a good thing. Make key decisions on whether to create an in-house parking management function or continue with the outsource or develop a hybrid model. We talked about that earlier, but that is a really key decision for you guys right now. I think it's probably the single most important decision, along with figuring out where we're gonna get some more supply in the next short-term period here. But prior to making that decision about how to reorganize the program, if you choose to, is Another thing that we were asked to provide is a parking management RFP. So if you wanted to put it out to bid, we gave you a good contract structure to focus on. We like to focus on the contract first and then build the RFP around that. Vagueness on the part of the operator, and where there's vagueness, they tend to pad things just to cover themselves, which is a natural thing to do. So the better you can define what you want out of that, I think it's a good thing. You might wanna put that out to bid just to see what you get before you make a final decision, because you're gonna get a lot of good ideas to come in, you're gonna get some competing bids, you'll have some comfort level that the SP Plus bid, assuming they would be allowed to be, then we would highly encourage that. The other thing is to better define exactly what should be in that contract. One thing I think we should point out is that SP Plus has done a lot of stuff that's technically out of scope for the benefit of the city. And I think you should appreciate that what you've been getting there. Not every company would do that, I don't think, going forward. Developing a set of guiding principles, we talked about that before, and we provided a set of those for you to review. Integrate parking as a key component of your larger community mobility strategy. So as Kimberly Horn is also working on the mobility plan, we've been coordinating with the mobility staff. We really think that the parking is a key component of the mobility study, although there's some people try to separate the two. So making sure that those two pieces are integrated together. And if you think about that, maybe you don't want to hire a parking director or parking manager, but maybe it should be a parking and mobility manager. If you're going to have a new mobility program, and parking is a big piece of the mobility equation, maybe one person. So Estes Park recently just implemented a new parking program. They're evaluating on street paid parking, so you're ahead of them there. But when they hired their new director, they made her the director of parking and mobility. She's doing mostly parking right now, but eventually her job will increase to focus on parking and transit and mobility options as well. And that's a real trend in the industry. The International Parking Institute is now the International Parking and Mobility Institute. So the idea that parking and mobility are merging together is really a national trend.
So the skill sets do in fact exist in one person?
They're better. There's only one guy I know that, I mean, you should go hire this guy today, but he's just retired unfortunately. But he was a transit director in Rochester, Minnesota, eventually got stuck with parking as well. But it's very rare to find an individual like that. But there are people now that are getting very focused and trained on mobility options and trying to bring those pieces together. So I think that's where the direction the industry is going. So I think those people are out there and I think you can find them. Implement ongoing data collection, including the addition of the new parking count technology we talked about. I think that'll give you better information to better manage your program going forward. Improve parking wayfinding, provide real-time parking availability information. The system that I mentioned before that was $8,000 a lot comes with, basically has a speed hump with a sensor in it at the entrance and the exit. So it counts going in, it counts going out. It pushes that information to a sign that comes with as part of the $8,000, and it comes with an app that you can push that out to. So you're getting a lot for bang for your buck there. Estes Park now has a sign as you're driving in that says real-time parking availability information, go to this website. They didn't have that last year, and it's just, people just don't know where to go half the time. So I think that would be a really valuable thing to help make it somewhere a little more palatable. Develop better data-driven decision-making procedures utilizing enhanced parking data. We provided a whole list of parking management benchmarks that we think you should be tracking and utilizing going forward. So there's detail on exactly the kind of stuff we want you to track and the kind of information you would need to track those. So that's in the report. Redefine key performance indicators. That's basically what I was just talking about. Provide flexible parking management during the peak season. This kind of goes back to that point I was making about permitting, having permit parkers in your very limited visitor parking areas. Plan for new supply development. I am really worried about when the car reopens in 2021. I think we really need to get something in place before that, whether it's a couple more surface lots or a plan for a new parking structure long term. I think we did come down and we coordinated this with our mobility folks to make sure that we were on the same page here. And I know the Metro Board has been pushing a garage in the Wichita lot. given the congestion during peak season right downtown, just getting in and out is very problematic. We think putting more parking in the heart of downtown is probably not the best idea. It's just gonna exacerbate the congestion issues that you're having. So pushing it out a little further, maybe to the Hiawatha lot or something like that, and maybe thinking of it more as not just a parking structure, but a mobility hub. That's a new concept that's out there. So, you know, that's where the bike share, that's where the scooters would be located. And, you know, all the other transportation options, the transit would pick it up there, the shuttle would pick it up there, and there would be parking there as well. So that is a concept that we think would be important to think about. We also provided you with something called the International Parking and Mobility Institute. They call it the APO program. It's the Accredited Parking Organization. I was part of the committee that created this. The APO is really trying to create standards within parking management. So you would have something that is, you know, recognized industry-wide and develop a set of standards, because really they were all over the board and nobody had a set of defined standards. It's 14 categories, very comprehensive, about 325 criteria. We're not recommending that you try to get accredited right away. We don't think you need to do that. But the program itself, the way it's outlined, is very comprehensive. I think could be a good roadmap for you in terms of a parking management program framework. So if you had a new parking manager, or if you hire a new parking program operator, using that program as the basis for creating something more comprehensive in terms of, you know, setting direction, setting goals, setting visions, organization, security, data security, all those things are included in that program. We also like the idea of creating an annual parking report, and I think this would be really valuable for council. That way you start to build some institutional knowledge, you've got the history, you see how it's evolved from year to year, you see what's been done in the last 12 months. You know, is it aligned with, you know, Plan Manitou? Are we hitting the right notes here? You know, and just giving you an idea of what's going on with the program and being able to have that documented year after year, I think would be a good program for you to consider. Identifying financial strategies for a new parking garage. This could include reassessing parking rates. This could include, so we would like to see if you can, we would really like you to create a parking enterprise fund, but one of the things we heard from finance was that you just don't have enough money coming in to make that viable at this point. So we're saying that once you get to the point where you've got essentially getting net $250,000 a year in parking revenues, then maybe that would be the time to consider putting something into an enterprise fund. And the reason we're recommending that, one of the things we heard from stakeholders was basically they said, you know, we wouldn't even mind paying more higher parking rates if it would help solve the problem. But we're afraid that if you're just gonna raise rates, it's gonna go into the black hole of the general fund and we're never gonna see anything out of it. That's the comment we heard. But if we knew it was going into a dedicated fund, we'd be much more likely to support that, because that's really, we know that there's a plan that's gonna address the needs that we're seeing as a community. So that may be a longer term item to get to that enterprise fund. But I think getting on that path for having a defined financial strategy for getting that parking structure, because I don't think you can just keep spreading out. Because then you gotta just provide shuttles, and shuttles are as expensive as debt service in the long run. At some point, it makes sense to go ahead and invest in a structure that's gonna give you the capacity that you need, so that you're not dealing with these issues and potentially driving away the business, because it's just too darn hard to park in Manitou.
Can I ask a question pertaining to that? So, that all makes a great deal of sense to me. What I can't get past is the more parking we have, the more people come. The more parking we need, the more people come until we kill the golden goose. So, how do we deal with that issue?
Well, I mean, it's kind of the growth curve that most communities are on, right? So
potentially, yes. So, I mean, obviously our mobility study is designed to counter some of that.
right.
But there seems to be equal problems over time with unlimited growth as well.
I agree with that.
And we are very geographically constrained and very dependent upon our tourists. So I mean, I can see the attraction is certainly there for just unlimited growth.
except to our citizens who, or our residents whose quality of life suffers as a result, but then their quality of life suffers also if we don't have the tax revenue, the sales tax revenue. So, to me, it's kind of a catch-22. The more parking, the more cars, the more,
I think there's a balance there.
where does it end?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can make that decision. I mean, if you were to build a 250 space parking structure, right? So maybe say at Hiawatha. You know, to me, that puts it out of the downtown, doesn't contribute to the congestion in the core, but it's still convenient enough. And in fact, it might help grow that area or enhance that area between downtown and that area,
Yeah.
just to make it more attractive and not to seem like, I had to park way down there and I finally got to downtown. Well, if it's like downtown all the way, you just expanded the downtown in essence and made it more attractive and just make it walkable, have public art and all that kind of stuff, the trails. But you know, maybe you don't want it to be more than 250. I mean, you could put 1,000 spaces in there if you want to, and then I think you're getting close to exacerbating that, and you probably couldn't afford that. So, you know, I just don't want to kill the golden goose, and I don't want the return of the College Railroad to be a negative. I want it to be a positive. So, I think it's a balancing act, but you know, there's something in between. But I think the whole mobility plan is to say, you might need 500 spaces, but we're going to take 250 of those demands and push them to alternative transportation and shuttles and other programs. And but we still need more parking, just so that we don't, you know, we're not at 100%, and people are leaving because they just think it's too hard. So it is a balancing act, and I think it's an important issue. So.
There's a question about enterprise fund. Is it possible that we could identify if the Metro, for instance, Metro District were interested in working with us and saying, okay, we'll take those lots and we'll put those funds into an enterprise fund. Can we do that? Can we be limited? It doesn't have to be all parking funds. Can it be certain designated, particularly since the city doesn't own those funds? Would it be possible for us to create a fund in which that revenue goes and is restricted for just parking, et cetera?
I think that probably depends on the Metro Board, but I think.
No, I understand.
But yeah, I mean, feasibly, I mean, I think.
You could do that.
You could, yeah.
Because that's one of the concerns I've heard from the Metro Board is, yeah, we work with you and then the money goes into the black hole and it doesn't go to the purpose that we would like to see it go. And what I'm asking is it possible to set up a structure that can accomplish that for the Metro Board, for the city, et cetera, to work together on that?
I think so. I mean, to me, that would make the most sense. If you had a parking commission that included members of the Metro Board on the commission, along with maybe a couple of council members and, you know, some community representatives or whoever, whatever makes sense. You have to define, you know, what's the Metro Board to get out of that? You know, they've got an obligation, they get their revenues from the businesses. Businesses want to see more parking, they want to see more business. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I see as the future is, you know, pulling your resources together so that you can do more than what you can do as a bunch of individuals, especially if you're not on the same page. Well, we want to do this and you want to do that, and we're never going to get together with this. But I think coming to some consensus on what's in the best interest of the community and using all the resources you have available to you just makes a lot of sense.
I was just gonna say that Metro's just gaining about 200,000 a year. Town is making a lot more than that. And we're keeping about 75% of it. About 150,000 is profitable. And we're keeping it and we're reinvesting it. Town is just spending it wrong. Maybe you guys should look into it and spend it the right way. Maybe you should do something special that it just goes to parking as opposed to trying to find someone else's money. You should do your homework and do a better job that way. You took from the URA $150,000. It just gets swollen in the general fund. The money is gone. If you look, you guys are barely making profit. I look at the numbers, it's over $1 million that the town is generating over in parking. You guys are hardly keeping, $80,000 barely in the green, barely. It's time for you to do your homework. Metro is doing a great job of what they're doing. It's easier for you to just come and try and take that money, but you should do your homework and fix it.
Thank you. And that's why we're here, that's why we hired these guys, that's why we're doing and spending a lot of time and resources trying
And
to
money.
figure out what that looks like. And if we can bring everybody to the
Right,
table,
you
you know,
guys
one
spend
sheet
all-
of paper, we might get there faster.
Oh, I
Mr. Van
just-
Wert, yeah, go ahead, real
Just
quick.
a short comment.
Short comment.
Okay, the Transportation and Parking Authority Board is represented by, the representatives are residents. They take care of the residents' needs. The Metro Parking District is represented by members of the district that pay the tax, and they take care of the business people. So you've got two, groups that have totally different interests. If you're a business person, you go to Transportation and Parking Authority Board, you're not gonna get any help. The residents get the help, even if they don't own a property. Let's say they just moved here last month and they rent, they'll get help, the businesses won't. If a business goes to Metro District and they pay into the tax, they're part of that district,
Thank you.
okay? So they're not compatible.
Appreciate that, thank you.
And, oh, one last thing. If you guys can't raise more than $860 a day with the parking, you're never gonna reach that $250,000. I don't understand how you can't raise more than that.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think refining and enhancing your parking enforcement practices is something else that we would recommend, and we provided some tools to help you reassess your parking enforcement program in the report. Improving the branding, marketing, and strategic communications related to parking and mobility, I think, is an important piece that kind of gets overlooked a lot. You know, how we're messaging that, how we're communicating with visitors and residents and businesses is really important. And I just think that, you know, having a really well thought out, comprehensive plan that, I like to think of it, I want it to be comprehensive, I want it to be strategic in nature, but it has to pass the common sense test as well. The guy on the street has to say, huh, I read your plan, that actually makes a lot of sense, the comment you made earlier. But you don't often get that, because we just don't take enough time to communicate and educate people on what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing things the way we're doing it, especially if we're gonna change direction and go in a new direction going forward. And then finally, review and update the residential parking permit program. Again, as you mentioned, provide some resources on what you might do there. I think that was pretty much the list of recommendations going forward. So happy to take questions or address anything that I didn't cover.
Council?
Question, parking commission? Parking commission in cities that don't have a metro district, but they have got lots of private parking operators, do you see parking commissions?
The model I'm thinking about is Missoula, Montana. They've had a parking commission for 40+ years, essentially a 5-person board that is appointed by the mayor and council. But they're technically like a city department, but they have a little autonomy. So they make the decisions on certain things. The only things that they can't change for some great reason in Missoula are they can't change fines without council approval, and they can't expand their jurisdictional boundaries without council approval. But everything else from an operational point of view, in terms of how they spend the revenues that they have, how much they charge for their meter rates, those kind of things, are all made by the parking commission board. And the board is made up of, you know, business owners in the community and residents and, you know, whoever the mayor and council decides to appoint to that board. But they try to get, they have an attorney on the board, they have a developer on the board, there's a variety of different people from different perspectives. But they manage it really well, and they do a good job of managing their assets. I mean, they had even lower parking rates than you did for years and years and years. They squirreled that money away, and right during the heart of the recession, they were able to build a large, nice parking structure that won several national awards, actually, and made a big difference in trying to keep a large employer downtown and those kind of things. So it's just that everybody's kind of on the same page. There's one group that everybody goes to for decisions, and they're all, you know, they work together and collaborate. It's not like Metro Board wants to do this, the city wants to do this, and now nothing's happening because they can't agree on where they wanna go. In terms of, maybe where a parking garage should be located. So I think that organizational structure piece is really important in terms of getting consistency and clarity and improving communications and helping improving collaboration between all the parties involved, for what's best for Manitou. There's also another white paper in that appendix that goes really into depth on a variety of other organizational models. If you want to see what the other organizational model, parking authorities, parking districts, those kind of things, it's all mapped out in a white paper if you want to dive into that in more detail.
So we have yet to figure out how we're gonna get those appendixes. We only have one.
Yeah, fine.
So we're trying to figure out whether we're gonna post those on our website and so forth, but just in case you were wondering, you have only one of many appendix, but we did talk today about how to push that out.
Great. But that, so you have a 5-member commission, but does Jay's parking company, how does Jay's parking company fit into that model?
Well, in Missoula, they manage it themselves, so they don't have a private operator, and they don't have a lot of private operators in town, currently.
Do they have any that own surface lots and charge and manage them?
Yeah.
They do,
Yeah.
and they just do their thing
Right,
at their rates,
right.
and they don't interface with the commission. I think
But
that
if
makes
you wanted to
sense.
hire a private operator, the commission would direct their activities and provide them the direction that they need and the guidance and the
But not
policies.
for the private lot.
Not for the private lot.
I think that was the question.
That's the question, because at the end of the day, to me, the Metro District is essentially a private operator. For all intents and purposes, they're a private operator. They've got a different structure, but you can either look at them as being part of the city, or you can look at them as being a private operator. Like if we had a fire protection district that went all the way up the pass and up the hill, Manitou would have absolutely no say about how that fire protection district ran in any way, shape, or form. And they might as well just be a private fire company that provides services. Granted, they get tax money out of all that, but at the end of the day, any municipality that was within their zone has essentially no say. It might as well be a private company. And so when you look at the Metro District, you can say, yes, you're taking tax dollars, but it's from people who ask to be taxed for that purpose. And to me, they are just operating as a private operator. And while it'd be nice to have everybody in the fold on the same page, the missions might not be the same.
Well, that's kind of one of my issues with the Metro Board, is they do seem to be kind of doing their own thing, and they're doing, I think they're doing a good job with what they've got and what they've grown over time. And the city really wouldn't work without those lots that they currently manage. And SB Plus is managing them, so there is some consistency in the management of all the parking going forward. But, again, they do seem to be outside, they seem to be outside of the city functionality and what's best, how does everything fit into supporting plan management or whatever it is we're trying to support the larger vision for the community. And to me, that's a problem. I would just like to get them in the fold and make them part of the solution and not a separate agency that is just gonna do what they wanna do regardless, but I think they should be part of the broader conversation and everybody working towards a common set of solutions going forward. Now, they own those lots, they're managing those lots, they're publicly available, that's all great. You don't necessarily need, it's not like you're taking their money because it's their money, but if that money is gonna be invested, like they wanna invest it in a garage in Wichita lot, well, we just need to come to agreement on where that investment should go, and it should be someplace that everybody can agree on going forward. But I feel like you've been stuck. We want this, and nobody's giving an inch, and so nothing's moving forward, and you're running out of time. You've got to do something to increase your supply before the next couple of years, where I feel like you're gonna be in a real jam going forward. So how do we reorganize this, re-envision re-envision this, reimagine how this is gonna work, so that it's gonna be in the best interest of Manitou going forward, and align with the results of the mobility study, because it's gonna be important that all that comes together at some point down the road.
Other questions? And by the way, if members of the audience have questions or comments, if you wouldn't mind using those pads, that would be most helpful. We've taken a couple comments, but I prefer to just write your question, your comment, pass it up here, we'll get it addressed. That would be helpful.
Neil, you want it?
I'll go with it.
Come red.
Council, what's your pleasure at this point?
I think that, it may be fine for us to take a risk, take a big bite, and act on some of these really large, recommendations. The small ones are, lazy. That being said, I know we've talked with Denise, and she's hoping that the staff can have a little bit more time to digest everything that's been presented before we go forward with any solid recommendations.
Along those lines, I had another, this wasn't part of the report, but it was just a thought that I had flying in here today. I think it wouldn't cost you much of anything, if anything. But I think if you brought in Vanessa Schnipwit from Estes Park, because she used to work with me. She was great. I cried every day when she left. They made a different life choice and they want to live in Estes Park. And so they have created a program, they've hired somebody. She can tell you what she's been going through for the last 6 months, trying to get a program up and off the ground, like you would be doing if you were hired to hire somebody. So I think she would provide some really interesting insight there. I think Scott Lee could come in at the same time. And maybe Melissa Yates from Boulder. Boulder got a really progressive program that they had in the past. It's kind of been redeveloped right now. But those people would give you the perspective of, if you were gonna hire me to move your program forward, this is what it might look like. These are the issues I'm dealing with here and here. And all these programs are in different phases of their evolution, right? But I think getting that management perspective from somebody who would be like your potential manager, again, they would probably do it for free. They would just come down for a day, maybe have kind of a working session with staff, or maybe even with some council members, and just hear their stories, hear their perspectives. Give them our report to read, and let them, give that critical read as well. But I think that would be a cheap, easy thing for you to do that would provide a little extra insight, and a little extra, potentially some extra value as you continue your evaluation and assessment. And I think it would give you a different perspective on things. And then you also, when we do these advisory panels and bring people like this in on big studies, one of the things that we always hear from the communities is, I didn't know that there were parking professionals out there. I didn't even know that was a thing. And oh, by the way, can we have her, please? Can she just move to our town? Because there are people out there that do this all the time. This is their real jobs, and they've really made it really is a profession now. It's really evolved. It's more complex than most people give it credit for. But I think that would be a good action for you guys to take. That wouldn't be very expensive, if at all. Like I say, it would give you a different perspective on things.
So one of the questions I think council needs to address or give some direction to is, are we okay with giving staff some time, maybe bringing some folks in? Part of it is conditioned on whether you all, SP Plus, is willing to hang in there with us for another 6 months or a year. Obviously, sign another contract as we did, with an extension of that. So premised on that we would be willing to do that. Is that the direction that council would like to go at this point, based upon what you've heard? Or that was kind of the suggestion that I heard, is take a little bit of time, study what's here, and then probably go out to the market and see what's out there. Denise, you want to say something?
What I would like to recommend is, Roy is gonna take over the parking with Michelle's assistance, and in March, we would come back with update of kind of what we found, where we are, what's happened, and in June, we'd come back with some decision points. That this is where we feel we need to go based on the numbers, really look at the numbers, see how we can pull everything together. If we can do it in-house, what that would look like, how we would move forward, what's the strategic plan, and then if we would bring it in-house, do the hybrid, et cetera, along with definitely reaching out to Estes and Boulder and all those places. So that would be our timeline, is March we'd come back, and in June we'd come back with a decision point at that time.
I would support that. I guess I would like to say that, no matter what we do, if we do nothing, it'll be incredibly painful.
Yes.
If we take one of these big projects, which I'm leaning toward, it will be incredibly painful. No matter what we do, it's going to be incredibly painful. At this point, I would like to say, as staff is assessing all of this, is to lean toward a grand, more grand than putting Band-Aids on things.
We cannot do Band-Aids long-term, right?
Right.
So one of the things that I'm wondering, and Jason, you guys recommended this not that long ago, I think it was through the last spot, is to move forward with the recommendation of identifying available parking.
Correct.
Is that something that we could move forward on in the interim, in the short term? Is that project close enough for council to approve or consider?
Well, is this something that you would want us to roll into our pricing, or would Manitou just write a check?
It's a good question.
Because I think as we proposed it in the past, that we would finance that for you in exchange for some term on the contract, and also because obviously if we advertise those costs out over, a longer period, it's more comfortable for the city. But yeah, I mean, we'd absolutely be fine with helping you implement it. I think the question is just how do we pay for it?
Michelle?
It's in the 2020 budget.
Okay,
As long as it stays in there, we were planning to do that.
Okay, so that's a positive step.
Yeah, we'd love to be a part of that. And I just wanna say, yeah, thanks to Dennis for, a fair and balanced, assessment. I feel like, you have a lot of good recommendations, and we look forward to baking those into our 2020 contract. I feel like we've been a good partner over the last few years, and, now we've got the deal where it's more transparent for you guys. It's a deep discount, compared to what it was before. And there's a lot of transparency. We've got a third of our management fee based on KPIs and deliverables. We feel like, and I think he echoed this, that the pricing is good and it's a very fair deal. So we'd love to stay here at Manitou. I understand you guys wanna look at other things, but, we're here to support you and help your program be the best it can be.
One thing that I would add is that I so much appreciate the new model, the transparency. That's really a lot of what I was pushing for, was getting the information out so that we knew what we were doing, what were the numbers, what's the data, and thank you.
Absolutely.
We have come light years from where we were, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Very much.
Thank you.
One of the questions here was, will SB Plus have an opportunity to comment on the recommendation, and particularly in some of the tools or templates, and I assume the answer is absolutely. So as the report is obviously available, let's get the appendix available. We'd love to have your input on all of that.
Yes.
That would be great. The other question, is there a size of community closer to the size of Manitou other than Estes? As pointed out, Estes was much larger than Manitou, so the question is there something more comparable? The point about Manitou not being smaller is that we're next to a 600,000 person city, and so Estes Park doesn't have that. We do, so I don't know if that helps balance out the size of people living there, but I would guess that we have a lot more people accessible to us within a 10, 20, 30 mile radius. The other question is,
The important question is actually revenue-wise. Estes Park is 4x Manitou Springs, so there's a lot more pooling of resources possible there. That was the point I'm trying to make.
got it. The other question is what's the status of Hiawatha Gardens at this time? And it seems as though a decision has been made to retain the building. I believe that's correct. If so, what's the justification? Probably, Jim, we're not going to get into the justification at this meeting, but certainly be glad to give you the rationale that the council discussed when we made that decision.
Is that even, it's possible to reconsider that? You know, I mean, it's a great location for a parking structure and a mobility hub, but retaining the building might make that more problematic, and you're not gonna get as much out of that if you wanna use that area for that resource. So I don't know if maybe the concept of a mobility hub got fleshed out a little bit, and
I think the concept was to put the mobility hub in conjunction with the building and put the structure behind it, and there is a design for that structure. Kimberly will do that for us. So that's available. Okay, questions, comments? Sounds like there is a plan. We're gonna move forward with some of the recommendations, it sounds like, next year, at least one of them. And then other recommendations will come forth to the next council in March, is what it sounds like to me.
I just was gonna say, and I heard Denise say that, but I just strongly have always felt that, you know, we have a water sewer enterprise fund, which is definitely dedicated towards that, and I think this is the same scenario that we need to do an enterprise fund, because it is for parking, and that way you can do a lot more with it, I think, so. Thank you. I won't be here, but.
Okay, all right, we're gonna move into the paid parking program overview. Sure, we'll take 4 or 5 minute break.
I'm Ed, and I live on Waltham Street. I just wanted to just kind of emphasize first that I was one that brought it up, and I just wanted to kind of just give it my perspective of why it's as you know, there's, when you're coming down up by Circuit to everybody slows you down. As soon as you get past that, it says 30 miles per hour. Car speed. Now what happens with that road is not straight road.
We're not buying it. Oh, you're gonna sell. You're gonna go
around the curve, line inside, and that's 30 miles per hour.
We're not stuck with it.
Goes to follow, I don't know, 1,000 yards down or something. So it doesn't make sense to have to keep it 30 miles.
And now what? We're gonna go with that.
But additionally, when you're coming off of onto the street, you guys are talking about putting a bump out on both sides. You put a bump out on the right side, that makes it even more dangerous for cars trying to make a right-hand turn there, or cars speeding around.
I don't know, because one of each other.
This is good. I know that. This is better. That's why the rest of the crowd, they can't see us, they can't see them without the bump. The cars coming 30 miles per hour. This gives you that opportunity to actually do that. Well, but this bump out here makes it so that if the car's coming too fast, we can do it. I'm not very because I got the 20 mile per hour. So that's the thought here as well. You can get past that road and this is flat now. You're actually stop here on a flat spot. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to narrow that road section up, which it provides you some more room here to stop, be able to look through. want good plantings in here, so that you can see, but then that'll also You'll make. also not be planting here? No, because that's important. And we'll make sure that on both sides, it'll be more important. We're making sure that all of these have clear space, side distance. But by constricting this, it'll also make this feel tighter, and people that walk by should slow down. The other thing is that medium, I know you want different things on there, and there's all the good suggestions about, all the reasons to keep it. And one of the reasons to keep it is that it provides us when we're looking at left hand like that, as long as it probably does things differently. But that's a critical emergency. Right, if that thing is taken out of that, then we have nowhere to, then we're going to eventually get in accidents with cars on one side of the street.
Yes, that's a good point.
Okay. So, all right, well, thank you. I just wanted to just point that out. Since I drive that regularly and I think about it all the time. You guys have to live with it. Yeah. Thank you.
And I appreciate your work and what you guys are going to do.
You know what's the difference? And who did that? In the meantime, Signage have done that. How much was that? Did you see any revenue from that? Doing right.
To address the incline problem. We would charge a lot of money for all that. Well, we're gonna fix that with an enterprise fund. I was talking about that. There's all solar area. Your own solar area. You're not gonna do anything with it. You said what are you gonna do?
You'll know when time comes.
Oh, this is gonna be a surprise, huh? It's a surprise. I love Margaret. Hey, I did the same thing. I did the same thing with your predecessor.
If it's there first, or if it's not coming
We're gonna go ahead and call the meeting back to order, and we're gonna call item D3, Paved parking program, holistic view. Michelle Andrews.
Sure. Becca said she would just provide the color commentary,
Perfect.
which is usually me, so you'll have to tell us how we spoke to. And I'm gonna, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of these. Background stuff, in the white paper, you have more information. You have the links to the different reports. And, you know, I don't think the expectation is that council's gonna go and read all of those immediately if you haven't already, but certainly it's good background. And even skimming through some of them for council is, you know, that's where we came from and why we ended up, you know, 6 years ago now, going into paid parking. So that's that background. I was also asked to provide partnerships, so I just plumbed the depths of, if you want to go to the next one, plumbed the depths of everything I could think of and provided those, what we would term parking or parking and transportation mobility partnerships. There may be other ones that other people can think of, but I think these are the major ones with Mountain Metro, Colorado Springs, a couple of Colorado Springs entities, Metropolitan District, the TPP, and SP Plus. So glad to answer, you know, questions as they come up. Stop me if I'm going too fast. Also, I provided, links to, and well, actually, I think I provided, to the report that's actually posted on, in your packet, copies of all of the agreements and contracts. Again, that was a pretty thick amount of paper to go through, but at least you know you have it, and if you wanna specifically reference something, I frankly have kept it myself, because it took a while to go and grab all of those and kind of, amalgamate them, so. Anyway, then revenues and expenditures, the next slide. It shows kind of a real high level overview. There's more information again in the white paper. I did wanna mention one thing specifically. In 2018, there's a pretty large deficit there, and the mayor actually had asked, geez, what happened? Well, I went back and looked at some things, and so part of that is that little part of the table actually came out of the larger financial revenues and expenditures that you all got as part of the white paper. And so that $384,000 actually incorporated some of these items that we don't regularly charge. They don't appear in the parking budget. So that bumped that deficit up more than what I think any of us were aware of, because it would look at it almost as if all of this, like if we were in an enterprise, this is what that would have been. The other thing too that Becca and I looked at was that same year, that was the year that the Schreiber Park parking lot was done, and Shelley had come to me, because I always have a little bit of money, there's a little bit of money in the parking budget for what we call parking lot maintenance, if we need to restripe or whatever. And that year there was 40,000, and so Shelley had come to me and said, are you gonna use that? And I said, well, if you need it. And she needed it for Schreiber Park, but what ended up happening is that line item was not just taken down to zero. There were other charges associated with that parking lot rebuild that I think $120,000 got put into that line item. So that draft, that's $80,000 over what was budgeted. But like Becca says, this isn't an enterprise. So going, basically the budget, the general fund balanced, but not necessarily that item. So anyway, I hope that helps.
It does, except I get the Schreiber Park issue, but why wouldn't that carry forward to 2019 if you're incorporating those expenses, those other parking budget expenditures? Why wouldn't you include them in 2019 as well?
Well, they are there in 2019 on the,
But some of them were one-time expenses for the
Exactly.
rebuilding of the Schreiber Park parking lot.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't to say, that didn't necessarily, all those explanations didn't take us into the black. We were still, from projections, we were still under about, I don't know, maybe $100,000. And that was from things like all of the parking on Canyon and Park being out, I talked to Kevin a little bit, the sinkhole, that all that hit that year, and so that really hurt the projected revenues for parking department. So that explains kind of that big number.
Well, thank you for looking at that. I appreciate it.
I was just gonna say, that was my directive, was to pull everything throughout the budget in the various funds all together onto one page to track what exactly is parking expenditures and the parking revenue. So, for the 2019 proposed budget, even when we include everything like the lease purchase for a parking vehicle, the Hiawatha Gardens principal and interest, that's all paid out of different funds. We still end up with, what we're projecting is about $150,000, in the black.
For 2020.
For, 2020, excuse me.
Well, I want to say how much I appreciate putting this in one place, because the comment that was made about we're not spending our money well, this is really showing where we're spending the money. You might disagree about how we're spending it, but at least we have a place to show where it's going, that is going towards parking related things. We are not making money, well, hopefully in 2020 we made a little bit of money. But up to this point, it's mostly been going back into operating the program.
Exactly.
And this is the first time I've seen this presented in this way, so thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's the first time I've seen it, and I think going forward, everybody that's involved in management, it's gonna help if we do this and keep it up. There were things in here that I had never thought about that would potentially be, I mean, they're parking related, but they weren't, like I said, in the budget. So it's something when we were budgeting and looking at trying to balance stuff, weren't considering those items.
Sure, appreciate that.
Okay, next one. So this goes a little bit deeper dive into revenues. It's a little bit of a summary of this larger page as well. Shows what, our revenues have been. I can tell you that in discussing with SP Plus in the past, in previous years, the parking revenue projections exceeded what they initially, and we had initially, projected out into the program when the program first started and we were setting the contract and everything up. So we've actually, gotten more revenues year over year than what we thought. Nobody, I don't think, thought we were gonna be $1 million or $1 million plus in gross revenues. So that's been a good thing. And then, expenses. I think it's gonna be very interesting to see how going to the cost plus contract. Previous contract was just a base, just a bulk amount. It was one amount, it covered, all the operating expenses. It was kind of everybody's best guess at the start of the 5-year term of what costs would be. And Becca had we only have 3 months, really 3 months of reporting under that cost plus, because we run a little behind. So she took July, August, and September today and calculated out, and it looks like, and nobody's saying, oh, let's change the budget, because it's good to have a little cushion when you don't know, for sure. But enforcement costs, we may have under budgeted by about 52,000. Credit card fees under budgeted by about 15. But SP plus expense, which is the operations cost and the management fee, we may see savings around 100,000 from what's in the budget.
Is that line item 340 that you just referring to? Which
Right,
is services
340.
SP plus, instead of 335, it could be.
Could be around 235. That's what I'm looking at.
But again, that's only on 3 months, but they are 3 of somewhat our busiest months. So, we don't wanna say for sure, this is what this is gonna be, but I think we are gonna see some potential, cost savings from what we've been seeing before. So that it'll be good to get at the end of into 2020 and see if that trend seems to be holding and provide those kind of updates. So that I think is very hopeful, especially with the discussion about potentially trying to do enterprise and that type of thing. And just a note on the parking department, when you see things in the parking department, we have 100,000 in services professional right now for expenses. That was, and just in case you don't remember and the notes aren't here, that was to, it's kind of a placeholder for things that come in from the mobility study. They recommended that we just had a lump of money somewhere, to see, cause there's gonna be some implementation, I'm sure the city's gonna want to do. And so that was kind of a placeholder for that.
I thought there was a $250,000 placeholder.
There's a $250,000 placeholder in capital improvements fund for actual capital improvements related to the mobility study.
And then this is for non-capital improvement.
Thank you.
And then other things, training and professional development and those types of things, those aren't SP charges. Those would be if I go to a parking conference or the board goes to a parking conference or we pay for webinars, that type of thing. So that just to give you an idea. Some of these are for SP charges, like the credit card fees, but office supplies, that budget line item is really for in-house office supplies. Their office supplies we now pay for under operating expenses, that's up in that 340 account line item.
Part of their pass-through cost.
Right. This is the technology equipment, second one from the bottom, 699. That's where we have the parking ID system budgeted for 2020.
So roughly in line with Dennis, about 8,000 per lot times 5 is give or take.
Yep. And then transit shuttle.
And something to point out here, just if I'm understanding correctly, the transit shuttle has been broken into two places, just so that people don't miss the fact that there's
The other
two
one's on
places.
the back of the page or the next slide.
Right, the shuttle cost us about $320,000+. If you just looked at that line item, you'd think it was 166.
Right.
It's not.
And one thing that I did this year for 2020 was I tried to, account for more of the shuttle out of the bar trail lot revenues. Those are dedicated revenues that we have limited authority to spend. Those can't go into the general fund. And so we need to be tracking how we spend those, which we do, and they stay in a dedicated account. But the shuttle, a large portion of it is actually due to trying to serve the hiking community, and so trying to pull a more appropriate, commensurate amount out of there, makes sense to me. And so that's what I proposed.
I was curious why you proposed slightly over the revenue number, though. The revenue number is about 260 something, and the expense is 280. I was wondering why those weren't zeroed out, or if it even makes a difference.
Well, there's a little bit extra in there for some advertising for the shuttle. So it's over what we pay Mountain Metro, we actually purchase, advertising, but that's only about 3,500. I mean, sometimes it's, we round up just to give ourselves a little bit of.
Would you not want those numbers, the revenue and the expense numbers, to be about the same, or does it not really matter?
Well, there was some carryover. There was some carryover from 2019. You're not seeing it here.
So they're gonna be about the same.
Right.
Got it. You're not going
Well,
to
I always like to have a bit of a carryover,
Okay.
and then
That explains
when we wanna spend more one year, as long as we've got that carryover, we're good.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Any more about the expenses and revenues or anything? And then expenses paid from other funds, I think that goes back to those things that we haven't been necessarily accounting for out of the parking budget, but I'd like to have those actually we'll keep this report going that conglomerates everything. Fees and potential additional revenue. There's no recommendation in this report, but I've noted some things that, this is the existing, this first slide is existing, where we are now. On-street downtown, off-street downtown, Ruxton first block has a slightly different, operation. On-street Ruxton, we're allowed in the RPP. Now, you may wanna realize that not all of Ruxton in the RPP allows paid parking. There's at least one area where the density is high enough that there was never any paid parking allowed in that area. It's RPP only 24/7/365. We've got the bar lot, everything basically lined out. One thing that we have not done, I'll get into that when we're talking about potential additional revenues. The Transportation and Parking Board has not made a recommendation regarding any of these yet, and staff doesn't have a recommendation. These are just things that have been talked about, mentioned in various venues, and some of them have been talked about at the board, and are intended to come back up for discussion at the board. One of the things that we really would like council to give some direction on tonight, the expansion of the downtown paid parking area around Memorial Park, 500 block of Manitou Avenue, one or both sides, and then around Memorial Park. That's something that SP Plus had brought, some information regarding potential revenues around there. It's very, very highly used, and it may be ripe for expansion of parking management. go through, the TPD did not wanna go down that road, so to speak, and then have council say, no, we weren't interested in you even looking at that. So we would like to get some idea tonight whether it's something that you do want them to go through a process, because there will be some public outreach and that type of thing. And to go through a process to, see what kind of recommendation might be made to council for that. And so they had asked me to bring that to council otherwise, but since we were doing all this tonight, I thought it would be good to go ahead and put that out. But then there are other things, paid parking at the Hiawatha lot, a fare for shuttles, sorry, that's not spelled right. Increase, on-street rates downtown, in parking lots, parking permit rates. We've not changed the parking permit program since before paid parking was implemented. These are the same rates, it's the same program basically as we were operating before SP came in and before we established paid parking. So it may be that, it would probably be a good idea to at least look at that and see what, pros and cons and that kind of stuff. I did bring up Metro District contribution. I think there needs to be, and it may be that their contribution now is absolutely bang on, it's fair as far as, some looking at how much parking they have and, cost and all that, cost and revenue and all of that. But I do think it would be good to have some sort of, I don't know if there's been any evaluation of, they have so many spaces, it earns this amount, we write X number of tickets, that kind of thing, and to make sure that they're paying commensurate with the service that the city's providing. I don't know if that's been done, I don't think it really has, but I think it would be good to come up with an agreed amount, methodology that then, as things kind of go up and down and move, that might move with it. If we're writing a lot of tickets and, there's a lot of activity and a lot of costs, then, that may be a little higher, and when it's a very, we have a down year or something, then maybe that's a little lower. But I think that would be good to look at.
I think Leah was looking at that, but I'm not sure what came out of that.
And I'm just not sure what method, and maybe we can find some records on that and see.
Kevin's gonna answer the question.
Leah did start that, and her time ended before she was able to finish. I believe that was passed on to you, Roy. The Metro IGA?
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
I mean, the IGA got done, but I don't know if.
There were two parts to that.
Yeah. So that's something that would be good to look at, and then the RPPs, looking at, we need to look at making some updates and amendments. I mean, we've had the RPP program started, at the same time as the paid parking, and we've had a lot of experience now working with it, and there's some things that I've noted that, and I'm sure Kevin has noted, that we'd like to get updated in the manual, better explaining some things and illustrating some things, and then also, looking at, and it would be very minimal, but it would maybe help with costs associated with establishing the program. Maybe it's a $15 or $25 annual permit fee or something like that. Right now it's free for up to a number of them. So looking at some, but it's not going to be, and I think I've noted in the white paper, several of these, they're not gonna be major revenue generators. They may just be small supports that help at least defray some of the costs of those kinds of programs.
Usually those programs are guided by just cover the operating costs for that program and not try to turn it into a big revenue producer.
Right. So, in regard to those are some of the ideas, and certainly if people have other recommendations, ideas, or whatever, we're, more than glad to look at any and all, but it would be good to get some direction from council. Do you want us to look at everything? Do you want us to look at certain things? I wanna make sure that I'm spending my time wisely, and I'm sure Roy wants to spend his, and certainly we wanna make sure that the TPD, those volunteers are spending fruitful time as well. so it would be helpful if council gave us.
So maybe we'll take a few minutes and kind of go through this list and give some direction. Do you want that investigated or not?
Yeah.
So let's try to do that. Expansion of the downtown paved parking around Memorial Park. Investigate, this is to investigate it, not do you want it done, but do you want them to go forth and bring back a proposal to us? I think is the question you're asking.
Right, yes.
And I think SB Plus and Kevin's already done a good piece of that research, is that?
Yeah, we've done some revenue projections, just looking at the 600 block in, Soda Springs area and Soda Springs Park.
So I guess one of the questions that I'd ask is, other than revenue, is what goals would allow us to meet?
Well, that's something.
Turnover around the park.
Yeah.
And downtown was certainly one of the main goals, was turnover. The question is, did we accomplish that? I think we have, maybe better recently than in the past. And if that's the goal, I guess I'd like some better, not tonight, but to keep going on that evaluation. What does that mean in terms of turnover? What will that mean in terms of getting more visitors, et cetera, et cetera?
And we're in the process of studying usership too, to see what the turnover rate is currently, but it probably needs a little bit more time.
Great, so.
My other comment about this is something to think about with all of these, including our upcoming discussions about additional RPBs and create, different zones, like 2 hours here and 15 minutes there. This is a big concern that I have, and I don't know how to solve it, but I think we have to solve it, is if let's say we expand that, and I know that Kevin's numbers also included the cost associated with enforcing it, but the more we push out and have these more paid spaces, more RPPs, the more stretched we are with SB Plus. It's not, I don't want anybody to leave this room thinking they're not doing their job. They just get a certain amount of money on this contract, and they have to make that go far. And I can tell you from living in an RPP, we haven't had a ton of enforcement because there's only so many enforcement people, and they can only be in so many places at once. And the bigger we make it, the more complex we make it with different things like 2 hours here and 15-minute loading zone here. It's just, we have to think about that, because we could keep saying yes to a whole bunch of things, and then we could be really disappointed with the results we're getting. And it wouldn't be, oh, well, they're not doing their job, because that's really not, we have to take it all the way out and extrapolate it all the way out if we want good results.
Right.
Because if it's a feel-good moment to say, yeah, we're gonna expand that parking, but a year later, parking is a place,
Staff to enforce it.
and parking is a place where if the rule can be bent, it's gonna be bent. It just is. Absolutely. And if you give an inch, people take a mile. And pretty soon you're a town full of people taking a mile, and nobody can do what they needed to do when they set out to have this program. The goals aren't gonna be met. And it's a long-winded statement, but I don't know how, we have to balance that with whatever we do. Because we're already at a point where we're not quite, I don't think, in certain areas. We do these things that sound really great, like we're gonna put a 2-hour zone in here and a 15-minute loading zone. And we can't enforce it, and pretty soon people are just living there.
So Susan, the issue is, should we have the staff and PPD investigate paved parking around Memorial Park?
I think they've pretty much already investigated it. It's really a question of, do we want it brought forward?
No, I don't think we have.
No, we've gotten some numbers, but before we entered into any kind of public engagement, we wanted to make sure it was some council, because that's gonna be more intensive.
Yeah, I'd take a step back, because what I'm thinking is that all these things need to be looked at as Roy is looking at this. So, and we need to look at it, go through it, and in March come back with kind of everything. And not say, do you want us to look at this or that, because it has to be a very holistic. And we have to look at all aspects of it and then come back with you, to you. So I don't think going through this list will be beneficial as we look at this program in a holistic view.
Okay. Everybody agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think without taking a comprehensive,
Right.
it's, you push here and
Yeah.
whatever, to be. But I do have one thing that we talked briefly about before that you might wanna add to this list, and that is, collections? Cause did I read 25% enforcement or collection on tickets?
I think we're somewhere around there.
So
But
that's
we
just-
actually collect 25%, meaning 75% of the tickets or not?
No, I think it's the
Bar
other way
trails
around.
is open downtown. That's Bar Trail, I think.
Okay, regardless, I think just something to consider is, looking at the cost benefit of hiring a collection agency and our overall philosophy. I know we've had that discussion before, but I think it's worthy of periodically taking a look at. Yes.
Citation collection ratio should be one of your critical metrics.
Is that what you were asking, was that the percent, the cost percent to collect, or was that the amount collected?
The percentage of those, if there's $1,000 to be collected, how much of that do we get?
Okay, cause I wanna say the 25% is somewhat in line with what Plus charges to do the collection.
But it sounds like 75% of the people are paying their citation, 25% are not in general.
We don't have to decide
Yes.
tonight, it's just
So
something
whatever
to
the-
take
I
a
can
look
review that
at,
report.
if it
Thank
makes
you.
sense,
Okay.
yeah, or not.
So anyway, is everybody okay with what Denise just suggested? Let's not go
So
through
we're
this
gonna look at
list.
it more comprehensive.
Look at it more comprehensive. Okay, fine, great.
And as part of your looking, you mentioned earlier about RPPs. You'll be looking at how they're made up and how they operate.
I mean, we can, that was not part of so much of what I was talking about. I was talking about doing some updating of the manual and making things a little more clear, both from a person that might be requesting an RPP and the standpoint of a staff person that's trying to work on implementing one. If you want a larger look into RPPs about, how they're used and all that kind of stuff, we can certainly do that, but I don't know whether we'll be able to do that by May. March.
March is the initial, just overview, and then June we will come with decision points in June.
Well, that can be something that, we could bring at some point to council and talk about in a larger context.
Hasn't the board been trying to put together a committee to kind of do that?
Yeah, to look at the existing RPPs and, see if we think that there might be capacity in some of those, and, maybe some of them could, look at some hybrid operation, maybe put some paid parking in Monday through Friday, just during the day or something like that. I don't know where we would go with that, and frankly, we probably would have already done it, but, from a staff standpoint, I haven't had a chance to, trying to process the RPPs that have come forward and do some things, so that's been a challenge.
And I would just add to that as well, as just, I was gonna ask this question later, but just the potential, how many more RPPs is there potential for, is likely to come forward to council, because I think that's very pertinent to, as we make decisions on RPPs.
I mean, I'm always sitting there like, okay, this has gotta be the last, and then another one comes in. And I think we're gonna end up with one around Hiawatha. I would be surprised if in that block in El Paso, that we don't.
We already have a small one.
Yeah,
Over there.
but on
Further
east,
down,
I would
yeah.
not be surprised if those neighbors don't come in. I haven't heard anything, but just from looking at the usage.
Well, I've gotta speak up a little bit on this. If we don't get moving on satisfying the parking supply and allocating it evenly across the city, we're gonna continue getting pushed into the residential neighborhoods. That causes RPPs to exist.
Well, I know, that's my point.
Exactly.
Okay, so, moving forward.
Moving forward. So the next, little bit we have here is about parking enterprise fund. And actually, I learned, a lot, in just doing a little bit of research and working with Becca. So I give you all a definition, and we got some information from the city attorney about how that kind of thing is set up. And really, it's a fairly easy setup. It's not technically difficult, or, it doesn't take months and months to go through some sort of convoluted process to set it up. But it really does need to be thought about, and, Becca has a point about needing, whether it's $250 or whatever amount that the city might say, this is the goal, where we don't feel we're ripe for an enterprise until this amount, it may be 250. But then also looking at, one of the things that Becca had brought up with me that I didn't realize is that once you have an enterprise, and this may get to that question about, can you dedicate a portion of your revenue and make an enterprise out of it? But when we were talking, Becca had mentioned that once you have an enterprise for this use, for parking, all of your expenses, and I guess you could, if you were only gonna do a partial enterprise, I guess you'd have to designate things that were and were not gonna be paid for by the enterprise, cause what Becca has said is that once you do in the comprehensive sense, an enterprise, then everything that you are doing regarding parking has to be paid for out of that enterprise. You can't then say, oh, but we're still gonna use the transit fund over here to pay for parking. Has to come out of the enterprise. Right. So, I think there's probably more that needs to be defined and how a partial would really work. I don't know, and I don't know if you know.
I would have to see the exact, questions involved in terms of what exactly is the defined purpose of the parking, and what's funding that.
Right.
But yeah, you can't just all of a sudden, it's like the water fund, you can't all of a sudden have the capital improvements fund pay for a water pipe.
Okay, we've had some discussion about enterprise, I'm gonna move it along, we're at half an hour, so just a few things.
Sure.
Anybody else have further questions on the enterprise or any other?
I do have a question on enterprise. Can the enterprise have multiple sources of funds?
I mean, it's fees, they'll all be fees.
Right, so what if this wasn't a parking enterprise fund, but a transportation fund?
It would have to have fees that are related to the service that's being provided. So I think of transportation could possibly be more. I know Malcolm had been suggesting, transportation related, expenditures.
But I think that was to fund street improvements or that type of thing.
But street improvements certainly related to parking, to cars, to the whole bit.
Transportation.
It's all tied together, yeah.
And so is a shuttle. Shuttle
Right,
isn't necessarily a parking
definitely
issue, but parking is funding shuttle. So then that would go away and that would be bad.
That would be bad.
I mean, not that the shuttle would go away, but then that's another few $100,000 in the general fund.
Right.
So it's not a slam dunk decision by any means, but it can expand its scope. It might be a more doable operation.
Well, I think you define the enterprise, and the enterprise definition says it's for, development and maintenance of parking spaces, surface lots on street or buildings, built structures, and you put transit in underneath that and, whatever else that's related to that, you could create an enterprise that addresses all of that.
Any other questions on enterprise or anything else in this way? I just had a comment, and I similar to the comment I had before, and that is thank you for putting this. This is the first time that I've seen, or this is the most comprehensive look at parking that I've seen in a long time. So thank you, this is really helpful. I would say keep these conversations going. That this is really good. Getting all of the right people to the table with the right information will help us make the best decisions. So thank you.
And this goes a long way to fulfilling the recommendation for an annual report as well.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. All right. The next item is item 4, consideration of approval of increasing fines for non-payment in the bar trail parking lot. We have about 15 minutes and we can do it in 10.
I can try to do it in 10. So, long and short of it, since we now have better usage up in the bar trail parking lot at the $10 per vehicle, we have seen an increase in.
It's not $10 per hour.
No, it's $10 per vehicle.
In one of the slides, it said $10
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
per hour.
$10 per vehicle.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, so if they might stay there an hour, or they might stay there all day.
Shows that in the presentation.
Huh?
You
change
meant-
that in the presentation, because I was like, okay, I thought
Yeah.
this was wrong.
Yeah, definitely,
Wow.
definitely
Very
need to
different.
do that. Sorry about that.
meant to point that out.
So, since we've implemented that and the usage is so much better and we're getting a lot more revenue and a lot more turnover in that lot, one of the things that's happened is that we have previously set a fee for when somebody parked in that lot without a reservation. I'm sorry, a fine for when somebody parked in that lot without a reservation. It was a pretty high amount. But since we're not doing the reservation program anymore, we can't use that fine. And so it reverted back to the $15, just like the downtown non-payment. Well, we're seeing a lot higher violators in that lot because, you know, it's only $15 if you get a ticket, you might not get caught. So, you know, so there's the people I think that are.
15 for the first.
15 for the first, yeah, 25 for the second, I think 35 for the clerk. So we've seen a higher than kind of normal violation rate, and so as People had brought it forth, and the TPB has recommended that we increase the fine for non-payment in the bar lot, and you all have that, I think it's 35, 45, 55. So it's enough, it's not as much as for violating the reservation fine, because that was actually started at $70. So it's about half, basically. But it's more than the 15, and it hopefully gets somebody's attention. That's really what the intent of fines are. It's to discourage
Change behavior.
bad behavior. It's to change behavior, yeah. And I think one of the things, and I haven't been up lately to look at the signs in that lot. I know at one point, I think we did it, but, we may have just talked about it, is to actually put the fine on the sign. You know, enforced 35, 45, 55, or however we could do that, so that people would know coming in, that's more than I wanna gamble, you know, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's the recommendation.
All right, questions about that recommendation? Comments about that recommendation? Would like to see that recommendation move forward?
Go for it.
Grant,
It'll be part of the,
Universal fee schedule.
which
Yeah.
is scheduled for next week.
Right, right. So we're taking out that section that was about the reservations because it no longer applies. And we put in a new little section specifically for the bar trail.
All right, sounds like, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think it's good. This is my 1 or 2 sentence comment, is that we choose not to talk about parking because it's a difficult subject, but we really need to get the word out about this. And you can't modify behavior if people don't drive in and see that sign that says this is the punishment, because they don't know. But when there's a sign, there's a bigger chance that they'll make a different decision. But in general, through our city communications, through the chamber communications, through Incline Friends, we need to get the word out, and we need to not be afraid to talk about it, because there's no parking in Manitou, so we just all clam up about it, and it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah,
That's
and
my
we can definitely,
rant.
and we usually do, when we make any kind of change, you know, we put it out on the Facebook, if it's something like that, you know, up at the bar lot, we'll at least let Incline Friends, they're very good about just pushing out whatever. A lot of times, you know, they'll say, you know, pay your parking and don't get this, you know, don't get a ticket, but if you get a ticket, it's gonna be this, you know, that type of thing.
And along with the
We'll
why,
definitely
it's
do
very
that.
important to communicate the why
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, and that's no problem, we've done that, before. Very good at that.
All right, anything else on that topic? Sounds like that, we will revisit that, next week with our fine schedule, or fee schedule. The next item is, item 5, recommendation for modification of Manitou Avenue residential parking permit area by removal of paved parking and inclusion of on-street parking in the 1,000 block. I'm gonna turn this over to Mayor Pro Tem Fortune, and excuse myself as I do have, this item will be coming up next week, and, I do have property in that area, so.
So I'll start out by saying, Michelle, you're gonna be presenting this?
Yes.
Okay, if you could start us off with exactly what you're looking for. I mean, there's a lot of information here, it's very convoluted. So if you could start out by saying exactly what guidance you're looking for, or if this is purely informational for us to be prepared for a vote next week.
Well, it is on the council agenda, it was originally on next week. And then it got pulled over to this work session, just to be able to talk about it, since we were talking about so many other things, parking related. So let me just give you, I think most of you are familiar that we've had a lot of discussions, that the Carleys, who are here in the back row, had come forward over the last even couple of years especially, wanting to get some relief for their property that doesn't have, it's got, I think it's 7 units, isn't it? 7 units, and they have no off-street parking, and their property is both Manitou Avenue and Waltham. And through all this process, when the Waltham RPP came in, we were looking at, how to be equitable. They do have frontage on Waltham. There is, the area in front of Banana Banner in the kitchen, basically, there's 9 parking spaces that are paid parking. That's kind of that last increment on the what I'm going to call the west end. So when you get basically past Ruxton on this left side, if you're going out of town, it would be, there's just 9 paid parking spaces, and then the rest of it, basically from Park Avenue on this side of the street, is RPP. It has been RPP for at least a couple of years. And so we went through discussions with the Waltham neighborhood. There's some real concerns about trying to accommodate all of this property up there. Basically, the Waltham neighborhood got to a point where they said, we want you to address an RPP down on Manitou Avenue, extend that RPP, do something for parking, for Banana Manor and these other properties right there that are technically fronting the paid parking. In our code, it says that we cannot have an RPP in the downtown paid parking area. And that was done for some good reasons. You don't want to have downtown residents coming in wanting to establish an RPP in the paid parking and have conflicts. That's why when the Manitou Avenue RPP was established, it didn't include those 9 spaces because that's paid parking. So after a number of meetings, and believe me, this was not a 1 meeting TPB discussion, the TPB looked at the very last meeting where they made a recommendation. I think we presented maybe 5 options. Leave it as it is, add these residences to the existing RPP, but don't add any more capacity. Do this, remove the paid parking over these 9 spaces, and modify the Manitou Avenue RPP. And there may have been 1 or 2 other ones that were talked about. Basically, everybody came down to this option and making this recommendation. And instead of it going from TPB right to council, because we weren't really sure what the recommendation was going to be and what the configuration was going to be, then we felt like we needed to circle back around to the neighborhood and engage them, both the existing Manitou Avenue RPP and the residents in this new strip, to make sure that they were comfortable with it and there was no real objections and that type of thing. So then we had a neighborhood meeting. We've communicated with those residents, both the existing RPP and the new RPP area. A couple of times, we only had about 10 people at the neighborhood meeting.
And none of them were from the residences?
Yeah, most of them were from the existing RPP.
Not the proposed RPP?
No, and
did I read that correctly?
Yeah, and I think the Carleys may have been out of town at that point, and I had gotten emails and things from other owners in that area or residents in that area, so I wasn't completely surprised because they're like, we're cool with it. They're happy with it. And so, we had a pretty low turnout. Actually, some of the people were from the Waltham neighborhood just to kind of monitor and, figure out what was going on or keep a track of what was going on. Nobody that was there. There were some questions and some issues brought up that had more to do with some of the 2-hour parking spaces that we have in the existing RPP. And so we do need to circle back. I told them that once this was settled, that we would circle back around and talk to them some more about how to try to maybe get those spaces used a little bit more by their customers and that type of thing. But it was a really pretty, small and cordial meeting, and, after that, we sent out another, set of letters to everybody, residents and owners, saying, you know, if you have issues, if you weren't able to come to the neighborhood meeting, but you have concerns or issues, can you please give us that by this date? If there are major objections, this will go back to the TPB for them to look at their, recommendation again. If not, then the intention is to take it on to council. We didn't get anybody making any objections. I don't think we heard back from anybody at all, basically, other than with some questions. So that's really where we are, is taking it forward to council.
Yeah,
And,
I do have one comment.
Sure.
It was not a unanimous vote at the Transportation Parking Board.
Right. Well, actually, I think it was, but there were people that had left.
No, there was one negative.
There was one, okay.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And, okay, anything else?
That's in a nutshell.
And, so again, you're providing information to us, that's it, you're not looking for guidance from us.
I'm looking for, if you wanna give me feedback, if you have concerns, if you, but no, you're not taking action tonight, so.
Right.
It's just an opportunity, I guess, to get some
Ask
additional,
questions.
yeah.
Okay. Comments? Concerns, questions?
Lots. I don't see the Rossum model on here as being looked at.
It was proposed.
Yeah, it was.
The which one is that?
The Roxton model.
Okay.
It's an outlier. In fact, Roxton residents didn't get to vote on it. It was given to us as a birthday present. And what's gonna prevent Roxton residents from coming back and saying, hey, our 338 spaces in the corridor should all be residents, and we shouldn't participate in the economic vitality of the town by providing any spaces?
Well, and I think that when we talked about whether that model worked for this area, one of the things that we talked about, it wasn't real extensive, but it does have, it's a very dense area, more similar to the area of Ruxton that doesn't allow any paid parking. It is RPP only. And so that was really what why that model didn't really work over these 9 spaces. Plus, the more, and I think we talked about that, back to Susan's issue, the more convoluted you make it, if you're changing stuff every few spaces, it gets really confusing for people, and we are just talking about a 9-space area. So that was some of the things that were talked about in the TPD.
Certainly change it going further down the avenue.
Right, and we have not talked about trying to put paid parking in for the rest of that RPP, on either, or on either side of Manitou Avenue. That may be a bigger discussion to have going forward. Does it make sense then to, kind of like we're talking about around Memorial Park and 500 block, does it make sense to rethink that area for some paid parking? I don't know. I've not looked at that at all.
Other questions? Susan?
I've had other people ask me why we wouldn't just use the Western model there, mainly for consistency, which is something we've always struggled with. I'm just bringing that forward as one of the first sets of questions that I've heard about that. And I'm sure the TPP board discussed this, but when we take these spaces out, there will be others who will want to do this. They will not necessarily read the fine print and look at Mr. Corpenning's explanation of why this is unique. And I think it's a little bit of a Pandora's box. But as I've said before, all the easy parking decisions have been made.
That's right.
And I don't like that, but it's true.
And none of them were easy.
Yeah, well, that's why I think.
We're easy by comparison,
We
but
probably talked about
it's
this
a
in 5 or
debatable.
6 meetings.
Yeah,
I
so,
think,
I mean, those would just be the two comments that I would bring up, is that as soon as, the decision was made to kind of go with this decision, and quite a few people just asked me, why wouldn't you keep this whole Ruxton thing wrapping around and going this way?
Right.
And that's just something I think we all have to think about. Thanks.
Yeah, a couple of them covered how, again, hard to assess outside of the, context of the rest of the city, which is what I was bringing up earlier. It seems like we just keep expanding out before we absolutely, have a handle on it. So we keep, limiting our options as a city every time we do an RPP. And I'm sorry, Gary, did you have comments or?
I'm good.
Say again?
I'm good.
Okay. So that, a number of things very much concern me, not the least of which is the fact that there was apparently, what you said initially in the ordinance, or the, we weren't gonna do, RPPs on Manitou Avenue. So and yet, well, okay, let me ask you this. Say again?
In paid parking.
In paid parking.
That's
Where are they parking now? Where are residents parking now?
I have to ask the residents. Actually, I think what's happening, most of them are parking up on Waltham.
True.
All of them.
Yeah, and so that, when the Waltham, this is why the two things kind of got
Absolutely, they're
connected.
together.
When
Yeah.
the Waltham
Yeah.
RPP
Yeah.
goes forward, that's not gonna be available, to at least the parts of the properties that are not in that right.
So is that why, I mean, this has come up for the whole time I've been on council. I'm wondering if it makes sense to act on this and or Waltham before we do an assessment of the entire RPP program, because it's to me, it's never ending, and it's just gonna get, every decision on RPPs is gonna get harder and harder and harder, and yet we've created expectations on this that we pretty much aren't going to be able to meet eventually. So I have some real, and yet I know that folks had their parking spaces and when paid parking came in, you know, but to me, parking has value, parking on public streets have value, and someone is realizing the value of it, and it's balanced because you don't have 100% access to it. But I don't think that we've captured and evenly balanced what the value of those parking spaces are, across between the owners, renters, residents, whatever, against what, because, you know, what, $19,000 a year we're talking about for turnover. And I don't necessarily equate it to Ruxton. It's almost worse than Ruxton because, you know, you're really close to businesses here. Up on upper part of Ruxton, you're not, that close. And it's much more level to walk, so it's easier for folks to walk through there. So those are kind of some of my concerns, and I was looking at some of the, you know, the A through E options that that the RP, or the, Transportation Parking Board, evaluated. And I'm not as I didn't read enough in the minutes to truly understand why they just to me, the easiest thing to do is just say, fine, approve it. I'm not sure it's the right thing at this point, so I'm really back and forth on it, so.
Can I comment?
Bill, yeah.
Thank you. You know, a lot of people, not only on Transportation and Parking Board, but the Carleys and the folks up on Waltham have invested one heck of a lot of time on trying to address this whole thing. And I think to sort of put them off at this point is maybe not a wise thing to do. And I understand your view of the holistic and everything else, but I think it needs to be done in the context of the whole city and what is our policy. But for the time being, doesn't mean we can't change it at some point downstream. But
Good point, yeah.
There is
Harder to
a lot
manage
of
those
people
expectations.
investment here in
Yeah.
this, and I'm not talking just about the TPP. I'm talking about the residents
Yeah,
and the owners, the property owners.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm
So-
not, again, not unsympathetic to
No, I know
that
you're
at
not.
all,
I know you're not.
so,
Well, and I also know that this does include some business parking spaces, like we've included in the rest of the Manitou RPP. And the businesses in this area have indicated they're fine with it.
read that, yeah. And it's very, for the most part, it's very easy to say you're fine with it when you're basically benefiting from it. So the larger community, that's why the council's voice is now representing the entire community.
Well, anybody in those business spaces, anybody can park in those for 2 hours.
Right.
So, you know, and that actually is one of the issues that some of the existing businesses brought up in the larger part of this RPP, because they are having people park there and walking, you know, and they're not coming to their business. It's like, well, this is, you know, there's nothing where we can say, you have to go to this business.
Val, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just, to take into consideration that what was actually presented to us to vote on was not all of those options in the minutes. They were presented to us and then staff one by one said, but this won't work, that won't work, and here's the only option. Additionally, we only had 6 members on the board at that time, so 3 votes was the majority, we now have 7.
Okay.
So it was a real limited discussion and a limited weighing.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, and I think that we had a meeting in City Hall and there was like 50, 60 people there. And it was Waltham residents that were very upset with the parking situation. We own Banana Manor, for 30 years now. I think, no, 29, it was 27 when we started this. And our tenants had always parked down there. And then the paid parking got put there. And you guys got to make a lot of money. And there was no issue until Waltham is like, it's so crowded up there, and they got upset. So they don't want my tenants, even now, if we get the 3 spots up on Waltham, 2 of them have Manitou addresses, and Waltham does not want Manitou Avenue parking up there. Why the Manitou RPP stopped right there? Because we're residents, we paid. Michelle told us we need 11 spots. I get 5 down, 3 up, that's 8. I don't wanna cause any problems, I love Manitou. I'm sorry about the parking, I don't wanna take money from the city, from you guys, or any parking spots. Is for my tenants, it's their safety. It is the value of my property. If you own the property and your people had always parked there and all of a sudden the city takes it and now I have to fight, which I don't like to do at all. I don't like this, I don't like
It's
this.
in residential too. There's no other around here besides David's, one property on, so there's no
And we
other
share with them.
apples and oranges.
We just, you know, I'm not asking, I don't want the parking across the street at the park, I'm not taking anything that I don't have to. But you know, when you have ice cream, you go shopping, your ice cream's gonna melt. What if you have a child in the car? What, you know, is convenience. I've owned it for 27
The
years.
value of the property.
Yeah, what kind of tenants am I gonna get? And then I was told, go park at the parking paid
2
parking.
miles.
It seems like the permits are
2
up.
miles, if you parked there and used it once a week and went from the closest corner of my property to the closest corner of that lot, you're walking 2 miles a week.
If you get a parking spot.
If you get a parking spot
Now,
in that lot.
all of the maps and everything, that's gonna stay free parking, and Manitou gets free parking, and it was taken, you know why? Because we did buy a great piece of property. It's
Yeah.
beautiful, it's right there, but I don't see any other solution. If the car wash wants to let us ask our tenants, can they rent it for $20, $50 a month?
That's over.
Maybe we would do that. But that's his business, he don't want my tenants there, you guys don't want my tenants there, Waltham don't want my tenants there.
And why did you guys vote in the 11 and 1200 block and not include us? That was pretty rude. I thought.
Yeah.
Understood.
So you know.
Thank you. Yes.
I also think that you're saying that you wanna look at it in the fairness of all that's involved, and I understand it's a hardship for Manitou Springs to look at losing those parking spaces. But I think it's also fair to consider everything that they're saying.
Absolutely.
Wait a minute, let me say this, okay, and part of the fact remains
those areas, those parking slots were available to them prior to the city deciding to make them into paid slots. Now, at that point in time, maybe the city did not notice that, didn't recognize it, didn't realize the hardship it would cost. Now they understand what it is, and now the city needs to make the hard decision to get those back up.
Quickly, we'll take just a couple more comments, cause we're on our time, so.
Well, to Eddie's point, I believe that when they originally did the RPP, and Michelle probably knows this, Roger Miller said that this was always an issue that needed to be addressed. And so it's not something that's just all of a sudden coming up. That it's built in at the beginning that they were gonna have to do with residential parking in there. And I think what Dale was saying is that this is a unique area in the sense that they have a residentially zoned property, and property at Park Avenue is in the whole downtown area. So it is a little bit unique in that sense.
Right, if they develop now, they'd have to have on-site parking. Got it. Thanks. Sir?
I live on Waltham, and I just wanted to address your issue about the holistic approach. And with the incline being so much more popular than anyone anticipated, and the cog rail potentially reopening or eventually reopening, Waltham is just terrified of getting crushed. And so I would implore you to, I understand you're looking at the city as a whole, but if we don't have some type of parking system in place before the cog rail opens, I'm gonna be able to park within a mile of my house. So I would just ask you to consider that.
Thank you. Anything else from council? Michelle, any?
I just wanna say that, I think looking at things comprehensively is a good idea, but unfortunately, a lot of times the issues are not comprehensive. They're small and incremental, and that's what they're experiencing.
Right. Okay, with that, thank you. Thank you all for coming and sharing your concerns and insights.
One other concerning matter, and that is when it's coming back to us. I don't see a placeholder on the formal agenda. Michelle, did you have, put a placeholder for this to come before
Well,
council?
this one got moved, I mean, I had put it in for the 19th, and it got moved to this meeting, so just this afternoon, I went in and put the placeholder in.
You did?
I did.
On the 19th?
But I told the city clerk that I would finish it and get all the stuff attached and everything, tomorrow morning.
Okay, so it'll be back before us on
Next Tuesday.
I don't.
It's not here. Oh, that's from Tuesday.
Yeah.
It was on the 19th and it fell off.
Cause it got moved to.
Just relook at it. I'm not saying it, but if it's.
I have to do that tomorrow, so.
So it'll be on the.
It's probably sitting open on my desktop.
So, call item E, receive council correspondence. Jay?
I don't know if, Denise will address this or not, but Heritage Tree Program and Park Tree Program are, moving forward at seemingly breakneck speed. Hopefully that, one or both come before us before the end of the year. Also submitted the, limit of council meeting time information, and you asked me some questions. I don't know if you're gonna put it on the agenda or not.
The last question I asked, did you have a preference on the two dates?
I did not see 2 dates, sorry.
That was the last question I had asked.
I missed the 2 dates. What are the 2 dates? Oh, 26th, but it could go like my 26th or 10th. Yeah. 10th.
Is that, maybe I made, yeah, I see, the 10th of November?
Yeah, December.
10th of December.
Yeah, we're past the 10th of November.
Oh, I know why I was, we don't have, no, it's not listed on our schedule, that's why. We blocked out, anyway. So the 10th of December,
I would rather the 10th, yeah.
the 10th, okay. And the 10th of December will be a work session. I think that's what you would ask.
Yeah, because I know
So-
Becky's not super
12th.
fantastic with it, so we need discussion whether or not we want Jeff to do an ordinance and so on and so forth, or whatever we're gonna do, so.
So if you could put that on, and then the other thing I had suggested was let's reach out to the new council and get their input on it as well. We send it to them and invite them to participate.
It's fine.
With that.
So are you gonna reach out to the new council and I'll put it on the agenda? Or do you want me to reach out?
Go ahead, reach out.
Okay.
Okay, anything else?
That's it.
Nothing.
Okay,
I think today's meeting really nice for the council for the man.
okay,
I would, propose to do 8-hour meetings.
there you go. Anything else?
You're one of the ones
Nancy?
that bugging
All right,
me to get
well,
this done.
I have one topic, and that is that I received a letter from Deborah Sagan, who has applied for the Urban Renewal Authority Board. And unless there's objection from council, I think the document says it's, the mayor makes the appointment. I want to check with you all. If you want to formally approve the appointment, we'll put it on the agenda. If you're okay with the appointment, I will make the appointment. And I don't know where that came from, by the way, but that's what I was told.
Yeah, we've never, it was always made on that.
That's what I was told. So,
Yeah, she's got great experience, by the way.
Super strong candidate.
Yeah, in fact, wants to be a great addition to the board.
I'll go ahead and make that appointment. Okay, and that was the only thing I had. City administrator report?
Anything that you have?
If you didn't see the email, Stryver Bridge, hopefully the day before Thanksgiving will be, open. That's all I have.
Yes?
No, I really don't have much tonight. Moving forward, we will have those policies, how we're gonna put it forward, and we'll bring it to you, for both of those. So we're working on them, and hopefully have at least one of them done before the end of the year. So,
Okay, so we have a total of 5 meetings through December 17th scheduled for the moment. No meetings scheduled after that unless there's something that changes. May change, but that's where we are at the moment. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, one thing, WAP ribbon cutting Friday at
That's
10.
right. That's right, I forgot about that.
Yeah, but that's still, are they gonna pull that back? I was questioning that.
Is that back?
No,
We're gonna do it.
Yeah,
It's not done.
It's not.
details.
They don't promise that they will open a few things that everybody has brought up, so, but yes. it's-
Major things won't be done are landscaping to a year. Our little pocket park at our sign will not be done, and the connection for the trail will not be done. And then whatever small punch list items, everything else should be done.
There is an update I do have. CSU, is Ian still here?
No, she's split.
CSU, did approve their rate case today. I don't know exactly what the vote was, but we've had some impact, so over the next year we'll continue to go with that.
It wasn't all positive.
Um,
I'll fill you in.
okay.
Anything else? All right, we're adjourned. 3 minutes after when we.
How you guys doing?
Residential gas service.
The council.
Not doing any new stuff.
Yeah, she is out.
We're just like,
Well-
anything in Baylor's Ranch, she had that.
You asked me to discuss this.
Yeah. It's actually, that's wrong. I don't think so. He's gonna have to, just talking about
Just expressing it.
getting rid of utility.
Yeah.
He told us that story.
I know. You know he is.
I should
all the names on the list and